What if some of history's darkest mysteries were never meant to be solved? Across forgotten landscapes, abandoned ruins, and vanished civilizations, unsettling questions still linger in the shadows. How did entire communities disappear without a trace? What secrets lie behind unexplained artifacts and chilling events that defy logic? Nestled among the rolling hills of western Georgia, overlooking the fertile valley of the Rioni River, the ancient site of Vani appears at first glance to be little more than a quiet archaeological ruin. Stone foundations emerge from the earth. Fragments of walls trace the outlines of long-forgotten buildings. Grasses sway between weathered remnants of a civilization that flourished more than 2,000 years ago. Yet beneath this peaceful landscape lies a story filled with unanswered questions, cultural crossroads, and mysteries that continue to intrigue historians and archaeologists alike. Vani was one of the most important centers of the ancient kingdom of Colchis, a region known to the Greeks as a distant and wealthy land at the edge of the known world. It was here, according to Greek mythology, that Jason and the Argonauts supposedly sought the legendary Golden Fleece. While the myth itself belongs to the realm of legend, the archaeological discoveries at Vani suggest that this region was indeed a place of remarkable wealth and international connections. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century revealed a thriving settlement occupied between the 8th and 1st centuries BC. Archaeologists uncovered temples, fortifications, workshops, imported Greek ceramics, elaborate jewelry, and an astonishing collection of gold artifacts. The craftsmanship displayed in these treasures rivals some of the finest examples found anywhere in the ancient world. Their existence raises an important question. How did a settlement located far from the major centers of Greece, Persia, and Mesopotamia accumulate such wealth and influence? The conventional explanation points to trade. Colchis occupied a strategic position between Europe and Asia, linking different cultures and commercial networks. Merchants transported metals, timber, agricultural products, and luxury goods through the region. Vani may have served as a religious and political center that benefited enormously from these exchanges, yet certain aspects of the site remain difficult to fully explain. Archaeologists discovered evidence suggesting that Vani was not merely a city, but also an important sacred center. Multiple temple structures were built and rebuilt over centuries. Ritual deposits containing valuable objects were carefully placed within sacred areas. Some artifacts appear to have been deliberately buried rather than lost or discarded. Why would such extraordinary treasures be hidden beneath the ground? Were they offerings to local deities intended to secure divine favor? Were they emergency caches buried during times of crisis? Or do they hint at religious practices that remain only partially understood? The mystery deepens when examining the city's final days. Around the 1st century BC, Vani suffered a violent destruction. Archaeological layers reveal signs of fire, collapsed structures, and sudden devastation. Most scholars attribute this event to military campaigns associated with regional conflicts involving the Kingdom of Pontus and the expanding influence of Rome. The evidence certainly supports the possibility of warfare, but the exact sequence of events remains unclear. Who attacked the city? How quickly did its collapse occur? And why was such an important center never fully restored afterward? Some fringe theories have emerged over the years. A few researchers and independent writers have speculated that Vani's unusual concentration of wealth points to a forgotten source of power or influence not yet identified in surviving historical records. Others suggest that the city's religious significance may have been far greater than archaeologists currently understand, perhaps attracting pilgrims from distant regions whose presence has left only faint traces in the archaeological record. There are even those who wonder whether the legends surrounding Colchis preserve fragments of real memories, distorted through centuries of storytelling, about advanced metalworking techniques, sacred rituals, or political institutions that once made this region exceptional in the ancient world. For now, such ideas remain speculative. The evidence continues to point toward a prosperous trading and religious center shaped by the complex interactions of neighboring cultures. Yet every excavation seems to reveal new layers of complexity rather than simple answers. Standing among the ruins today, surrounded by hills that have witnessed countless generations come and go, it is difficult not to wonder how much of Vani's story still lies hidden beneath the soil. How many secrets remain buried in the foundations of its temples, waiting for discovery? And could future excavations reveal that this seemingly quiet archaeological site played a far greater role in ancient history than anyone currently imagines? If Vani leaves us wondering how much of the ancient world still lies hidden beneath the soil, then our journey now carries us farther east, across vast deserts and forgotten frontiers, to another place where silence seems to guard its own secrets. Rising from the arid plains of Central Asia, surrounded by windswept emptiness and shifting sands, stands the enigmatic fortress known as Toprak Kala. At first sight, Toprak Kala appears almost unreal. Massive mud brick walls emerge from the desert floor like the remains of a forgotten kingdom frozen in time. From above, its geometric layout is still remarkably visible, revealing a carefully planned city enclosed within imposing fortifications. The ruins stand in what is now Uzbekistan, a landscape that once formed part of the powerful Khwarezm civilization, one of the great yet often overlooked cultures of the ancient world. Built sometime during the 1st centuries A.D., Toprak Kala served as a royal residence and administrative center of the Khwarezmian kingdom. Archaeological excavations conducted during the 20th century uncovered an extraordinary complex of palaces, ceremonial halls, archives, and temples. Unlike many ancient cities that were repeatedly occupied and rebuilt over thousands of years, Toprak Kala offers something rare, a relatively intact snapshot of a single civilization at a particular moment in history. Yet despite decades of study, many questions remain. The fortress itself is immense. Its walls once stretched nearly a mile around the settlement, reinforced by towers designed to withstand attack. Within these defenses stood elaborate structures decorated with sculptures, murals, and intricate architectural features. Excavators discovered halls filled with clay statues representing rulers, nobles, and perhaps even deities. Who exactly were these figures meant to represent? Some seem straightforward enough, depicting members of the royal court. Others are more difficult to interpret. Several statues appear to blend symbolic and human characteristics in ways that continue to spark debate. Were these images of gods, ancestors, mythological beings? Or did they serve some ceremonial function that has been lost to time? Among the most intriguing discoveries were archives containing numerous documents written on wood and leather. These records offered valuable glimpses into administration, taxation, and governance. Yet many texts were fragmented or incomplete, leaving historians with only pieces of a much larger puzzle. What stories disappeared with the missing pages? What events, beliefs, or conflicts may never be fully reconstructed? The mainstream view presents Toprak Kala as the seat of a sophisticated regional kingdom that thrived through trade, agriculture, and political organization. Positioned along important routes connecting east and west, Khwarezm benefited from the exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas moving across Central Asia. But some features of the site continue to invite speculation. The palace complex contains rooms whose purposes remain uncertain. Certain ceremonial spaces appear unusually elaborate, suggesting rituals of considerable importance. Archaeologists have identified evidence of fire-related practices, leading many scholars to connect the site with forms of Zoroastrian worship, a religion that played a major role across much of ancient Iran and Central Asia. Yet the exact nature of these rituals remains unclear. Were these ceremonies dedicated solely to known religious traditions, Or did they preserve local customs that have vanished from the historical record? Could some practices represent a blending of beliefs from multiple cultures passing through the region? The mystery deepens when considering the eventual abandonment of the fortress. At some point, Toprak Kala lost its importance. The royal court moved elsewhere, and the city gradually declined. Environmental changes, political instability, shifting trade routes, and military pressures have all been proposed as explanations. Each theory contains pieces of the answer, but none fully explains every aspect of the site's history. In the absence of certainty, more speculative ideas have occasionally emerged. Some researchers have suggested that hidden chambers may still exist beneath unexplored portions of the complex. Others wonder whether undiscovered archives remain buried beneath the desert floor, preserving records capable of transforming our understanding of Khwarezmian society. There are even theories that the fortress was designed according to symbolic principles not yet fully recognized by modern archaeology. Certain researchers have pointed to the city's carefully organized layout, asking whether its architecture reflected cosmological beliefs, sacred geometry, or political symbolism whose meanings have long since faded. For now, the desert keeps many of its answers to itself. As sunlight moves across the ancient walls and shadows stretch through abandoned halls once occupied by kings and priests, Toprak Kala feels less like a ruin and more like a question preserved in earth and stone. Beneath layers of dust, behind collapsed corridors, and under centuries of silence, how much of its story remains waiting to be uncovered? And if new discoveries are still hidden beneath the sands, what forgotten chapter of human history might they reveal? If the silent walls of Toprak Kala leave us searching for clues hidden beneath desert sands, our journey now leads westward, toward a rugged hill overlooking the valley of Elah in Palestine. Here, amid rocky slopes and ancient terraces, lies a site that has become the center of one of archaeology's most fascinating debates. Known as Khirbet Qeiyafa, this fortified settlement has challenged long-held assumptions about the ancient world, raising questions that remain far from settled. From a distance, the site appears modest. Low stone walls trace the outline of an ancient city. Excavated foundations emerge from the earth in carefully arranged patterns. The surrounding landscape is striking, rolling hills stretching toward the horizon, interrupted by valleys that have witnessed thousands of years of human history. Yet beneath this quiet surface lies a mystery that reaches far beyond the ruins themselves. Khirbet Qeiyafa dates primarily to the late 11th and early 10th centuries BC, a period often associated with major political and cultural transformations throughout the region. Archaeologists uncovered a heavily fortified settlement surrounded by a massive casemate wall, complete with defensive structures and two prominent gates. It is this unusual feature, the presence of two city gates, that first attracted widespread attention. Most fortified cities of the era possessed a single main entrance. Khirbet Qeiyafa's dual gates are rare enough that some scholars immediately began searching ancient texts for possible connections. Could this site correspond to a city mentioned in historical records? Was it part of a developing kingdom, or did it belong to an entirely different cultural group? The answers remain surprisingly elusive. Excavations revealed evidence of urban planning, administrative organization, and significant construction efforts. Such findings suggest a society capable of coordinating labor and resources on a considerable scale. Pottery, tools, animal bones, and domestic structures have provided valuable glimpses into everyday life. But it is a handful of more unusual discoveries that continue to fuel debate. Among the most discussed finds was a pottery shard bearing an inscription written in an early alphabetic script. The text is incomplete and difficult to interpret. Scholars disagree not only about its meaning, but even about the language in which it was written. Could it represent one of the earliest examples of regional writing ever discovered? Was it an administrative record, a legal statement, a religious text, or something else entirely? The inscription's fragmented nature leaves room for multiple interpretations, and each possibility carries major implications for understanding the political and cultural landscape of the time. The identity of the settlement itself remains another source of uncertainty. Some archaeologists argue that Khirbet Qeiyafa reflects the emergence of an organized kingdom in the region, pointing to its fortifications, planning, and strategic location. Others suggest it may have belonged to a neighboring cultural group, emphasizing similarities with populations living nearby during the same period. The debate is not merely about the name of an ancient city. It touches on broader questions regarding state formation, political authority, and the development of complex societies during a poorly understood chapter of history. And then there are the aspects that remain harder to explain. Why was such a heavily fortified city occupied for what appears to have been a relatively brief period before being abandoned? What circumstances led to its decline? Military conflict, economic shifts, environmental pressures, and political changes have all been proposed. Yet no single explanation has achieved universal acceptance. The site's strategic position overlooking important routes has also inspired more speculative theories. Some researchers wonder whether Khirbet Qeiyafa served functions beyond defense and administration. Could it have held ceremonial significance? Did it act as a regional center whose importance has been underestimated because so much evidence has disappeared? Others point to the remarkable state of preservation and ask how many unanswered questions still lie beneath unexcavated sections of the hill. Even the city gates themselves continue to provoke curiosity. Why were two gates necessary? Were they intended for trade, defense, symbolism, or some combination of all three? Such a seemingly simple architectural feature has become one of the site's enduring puzzles. Today, winds sweep across the exposed stone walls much as they did nearly 3,000 years ago. Visitors standing atop the hill can look across the valley and imagine the movement of traders, soldiers, farmers, and travelers who once passed below. Yet despite years of research, Khirbet Qeiyafa continues to resist simple explanations. Perhaps that is what makes the site so compelling. The ruins offer evidence, but not certainty. They provide clues, but not complete answers. And somewhere beneath the stones, hidden within fragments of inscriptions, abandoned structures, and layers of forgotten history, there may still be discoveries capable of changing our understanding of an entire era. The question is, what secrets remain waiting beneath the hill, and how differently might the past appear once they are finally uncovered? If sites like Khirbet Qeiyafa remind us how much of history can remain hidden beneath layers of earth and stone, our next mystery takes us somewhere even more elusive. To find it, we must leave the dry hills and ancient fortifications behind and descend beneath the surface of the sea itself. There, off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, lies a structure that has sparked decades of debate, a formation that some see as a remarkable work of nature, while others believe may be the remnants of a lost chapter of human history. Beneath the clear blue waters of the East China Sea, approximately 80 feet below the surface, a massive rock formation rises from the ocean floor. Divers approaching it for the first time often describe a sense of disbelief. Before them stands what appears to be a giant stone monument, complete with broad terraces, sharp edges, flat platforms, and stair-like features descending into the depths. The structure is known as the Yonaguni Monument. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver searching for favorable diving locations, the site quickly attracted international attention. Photographs and underwater footage revealed a formation unlike anything most people expected to find beneath the sea. Large sections appear strikingly geometric. Some surfaces seem almost unnaturally smooth. Certain angles look so precise that they resemble the work of engineers rather than geological processes. And that is where the mystery begins. Geologists studying the monument have offered a straightforward explanation. According to the prevailing view, The formation consists primarily of sandstone and mudstone layers shaped over long periods by natural forces. The rock contains numerous natural fractures, often breaking along straight lines and right angles. Combined with erosion from waves, currents, and seismic activity, these fractures can create features that appear surprisingly artificial. To many researchers, the monument represents an extraordinary example of nature's ability to produce patterns that mimic human design. Yet not everyone is convinced. Several investigators have pointed to aspects of the formation they believe are difficult to explain through natural processes alone. They highlight apparent terraces, platforms, channels, and geometric arrangements that seem unusually organized. Some observers claim to identify what resemble roads, plazas, retaining walls, or even ceremonial spaces. Could these impressions simply be the result of the human tendency to recognize familiar patterns where none actually exist? Or is there something more beneath the waves? The debate becomes even more intriguing when considering sea levels during the last ice age. Thousands of years ago, when vast quantities of water were locked in glaciers, global sea levels were significantly lower than they are today. Areas now submerged would once have been dry land. This raises an obvious question. If portions of the Yonaguni Formation stood above water in the distant past, could ancient people have modified an existing natural structure? Even small-scale human alterations could potentially create features that later generations might mistake for a much larger construction project. At present, no definitive evidence has emerged to prove that the monument was built by an ancient civilization. No tools have been found embedded within the structure. No inscriptions have been identified. No artifacts conclusively connect the site to a known culture. Yet uncertainty continues to fuel speculation. Some fringe theories suggest that Yonaguni may be linked to a lost civilization that existed before the end of the last ice age. According to these ideas, rising seas could have submerged coastal settlements around the world, erasing much of the evidence. Supporters occasionally compare Yonaguni to legendary tales of vanished lands and forgotten cultures preserved in myth. Others go even further, proposing connections to hypothetical prehistoric societies possessing levels of organization not currently recognized by mainstream archaeology. Such theories remain highly controversial, and most researchers continue to favor natural explanations. Still, the monument occupies a curious space between certainty and doubt. It is neither fully understood nor fully explained in a way that satisfies everyone who studies it. Perhaps that is why the site remains so captivating. As schools of fish glide across its terraces and sunlight filters through the water above, the monument seems suspended between two worlds, part geological formation, part enduring question. Every angle invites interpretation. Every shadow suggests possibility. And beneath the waves, where silence has preserved its secrets for thousands of years, the Yonaguni Monument continues to challenge our assumptions about both nature and the distant past. Was it shaped entirely by the forces of geology, patiently sculpted over immense spans of time? Or does it contain traces of human activity from an era that history has long forgotten? For now, the ocean keeps its answer hidden, waiting in the depths where mystery and evidence continue to meet. If the Yonaguni Monument challenges our understanding of what may lie hidden beneath the oceans, the next mystery takes us back onto dry land, into a landscape where history itself seems buried beneath layers of sand and time. Along a great bend of the Nile, deep within what is now northern Sudan, the ancient settlement of Kerma emerges from the desert like the fading memory of a forgotten kingdom. Once a powerful center of civilization, Kerma remains one of the most intriguing and, in many ways, least understood cities of the ancient world. The first impression of Kerma is one of silence. Surrounded by vast expanses of desert and nourished by the waters of the Nile, the site is dominated by enormous mud brick structures that rise unexpectedly from the plain. The most striking among them is the western Dafufa, a massive monument whose thick walls and elevated terraces still tower above the surrounding landscape. Weathered by thousands of years of wind and sun, it resembles something suspended between a temple, a fortress, and a monument to a civilization that history nearly forgot. For centuries, the kingdom of Kerma flourished along the Nile, reaching its height between roughly 2500 and 1500 BC. During this period, it developed into one of Africa's earliest urban centers and became a major political power. Archaeological evidence reveals a sophisticated society with extensive trade networks, skilled craftsmen, organized administration, and monumental architecture. Yet for a surprisingly long time, Kerma remained overshadowed by its more famous northern neighbor, ancient Egypt. Early archaeologists often assumed that the culture at Kerma was merely an extension of Egyptian influence. But as excavations continued, a different picture began to emerge. Far from being a peripheral outpost, Kerma appears to have been the heart of an independent kingdom with its own traditions, beliefs, and political ambitions. This realization opened the door to a series of fascinating questions. How did a civilization of such scale and complexity remain underestimated for so long? And how much of its history has been lost because ancient records were written primarily by its rivals and trading partners? Some of the most intriguing discoveries come from Kerma's vast cemeteries. Thousands of burials have been uncovered, ranging from simple graves to enormous royal tombs. Within these tombs, archaeologists found jewelry, weapons, imported goods, and evidence of elaborate funerary practices. Yet certain burials have proven especially puzzling. Some royal tombs contain not only the deceased ruler, but also large numbers of accompanying individuals who appear to have been buried at the same time. Scholars continue to debate the exact nature of these burials. Were they sacrificial attendants intended to accompany a king into the afterlife? Loyal retainers? Victims of social obligations that remain poorly understood? The archaeological evidence provides clues, but not complete certainty. Then there is the mystery of the defufas themselves. These enormous mud brick structures are among the most distinctive features of Kerma. Their size and design suggest ceremonial importance, but their precise functions remain subjects of discussion. Were they temples, administrative centers, royal platforms used during rituals and public ceremonies? Even today, standing before these towering monuments, it is difficult not to wonder what activities once unfolded within their walls. The questions grow even larger when examining Kerma's rise to power. Historical evidence suggests that the kingdom became wealthy through trade networks that connected Central Africa, the Nile Valley, and regions farther beyond. Gold, ivory, ebony, livestock, and other valuable goods flowed through its territory. At times, Kerma grew powerful enough to challenge Egypt itself, becoming a formidable rival. But how exactly did this kingdom organize and maintain such influence across a vast region? Much of its written record has either been lost or may never have existed in forms that survived. As a result, archaeologists often find themselves reconstructing an entire civilization through architecture, artifacts, and fragments of evidence scattered across the desert. This absence of written testimony has naturally encouraged more speculative ideas. Some researchers wonder whether major portions of the city still lie hidden beneath unexcavated layers of sand. Others suggest that undiscovered royal tombs could contain archives or artifacts capable of dramatically reshaping our understanding of the kingdom. A few fringe theories propose that Kerma's true extent and influence have been vastly underestimated, arguing that it may have played a larger role in ancient regional politics than current evidence reveals. Such ideas remain unproven, but they reflect a deeper reality. Despite decades of research, Kerma still guards many of its secrets. As evening shadows stretch across the desert and the ancient defufas glow beneath the fading light, the settlement feels less like a collection of ruins and more like a doorway into a partially remembered past. The monuments remain. The tombs remain. The traces of a powerful kingdom remain. Yet so much of its story exists only in fragments. And somewhere beneath the sands of the Nile Valley, perhaps entire chapters of that story are still waiting to be found. What forgotten voices might emerge if those buried chapters are ever uncovered? Kerma Settlement. If Kerma leaves us contemplating the civilizations that vanished beneath desert sands, our next destination takes us deeper into the ancient Near East, to a place where the boundaries between history, religion, and the unknown seem unusually thin. Rising from the plains of northeastern Syria, Tel Mozan appears at first to be just another weathered mound on the horizon. But beneath its layers of earth lies the forgotten city of Urkesh, a kingdom so old, so mysterious, that even the civilizations that followed it viewed it as ancient. From a distance, Tel Mozan is unassuming. A broad hill of dust-colored soil rises gently above the surrounding landscape, shaped by thousands of years of human occupation. Yet every layer of that mound represents generations of lives, rulers, beliefs, and events buried one atop another. To archaeologists, it is a vast archive. To historians, it is a doorway into one of the least understood chapters of early civilization. The site is widely identified as the ancient city of Urkesh, one of the major centers of the Hurrians, a people whose origins remain surprisingly obscure. By the 3rd millennium BC, Urkesh was already a thriving city, complete with monumental architecture, administrative systems, and religious institutions. But who exactly were the Hurrians? Despite decades of study, scholars still debate aspects of their origins, language, and cultural development. Their influence spread across large portions of the ancient Near East, yet many details about their earliest history remain frustratingly elusive. Unlike some neighboring civilizations that left behind extensive written records, much of the Hurrian story survives only in fragments. And it is within those fragments that the mystery begins. Excavations at Tel Mozan have uncovered palaces, temples, fortifications, and administrative archives. These discoveries paint a picture of a sophisticated urban center that participated in regional trade and diplomacy. Yet among the site's most intriguing structures is a feature known simply as the underground passage, often associated with a ceremonial pit called an abi. Descending into this structure today feels like entering another world. Stone-lined walls lead downward into darkness. The air grows cooler. Sunlight fades behind you. The purpose of the chamber remains debated, but many archaeologists believe it had religious significance. Ancient texts from the broader region describe rituals intended to communicate with deities or spirits connected to the underworld. Some scholars suggest that structures like the one at Urkesh may have served as symbolic gateways between the world of the living and the realm beyond. What ceremonies took place here? Who descended into these depths thousands of years ago, and what did they believe awaited them below? No definitive answers exist. The uncertainty surrounding the underground complex has naturally attracted speculation. While mainstream researchers interpret it within the framework of ancient religion, others wonder whether aspects of its purpose have been lost entirely. Could certain rituals have involved experiences or beliefs that modern archaeology struggles to recognize? Were these spaces designed purely for symbolism, or did they serve practical functions hidden beneath religious traditions? The mysteries extend beyond the underground chamber itself. Urkesh appears to have been a major center of power during periods when larger empires were competing for influence across the region. Yet unlike many contemporary cities, its historical trajectory is surprisingly difficult to reconstruct. At times it seems prominent and influential. At other moments it fades almost completely from the surviving record. Why? Was this simply the result of incomplete documentation, or were larger political and environmental changes reshaping the city in ways we still do not fully understand? Then there are the seals, inscriptions, and artifacts recovered from the site. These objects reveal the names of rulers, officials, and religious figures. but they also hint at beliefs and traditions that remain only partially understood. Certain symbols appear repeatedly, suggesting mythologies and sacred concepts whose full meanings have long since disappeared. Like scattered pieces of a shattered mirror, the evidence reflects fragments of a larger picture, but never the whole image. Some fringe theories have gone even further, proposing that Urkesh preserved unusually ancient traditions inherited from cultures that existed before recorded history. Others speculate that the city's mysterious religious structures inspired legends that later spread throughout the Near East, evolving into stories of hidden worlds, forbidden knowledge, and gateways to unseen realms. There is little evidence to confirm such ideas, yet their persistence reflects something undeniable about Tel Mozan. The site possesses an atmosphere that invites questions. As evening shadows stretch across the mound and the winds move quietly over ruins buried beneath centuries of soil, it becomes easy to imagine how much remains hidden below. Entire buildings may still lie undiscovered. Archives may remain sealed beneath collapsed walls. Forgotten stories may still wait beneath layers of earth untouched for thousands of years. And perhaps that is the most unsettling mystery of all. For every answer uncovered at Tel Mozan, new questions seem to emerge from the darkness. Beneath this ancient hill, once home to a civilization that viewed the underworld as a tangible presence, what secrets remain buried, and what might they reveal about humanity's earliest attempts to understand the unknown? If Tel Mozan invites us to peer into forgotten beliefs and buried gateways to the unknown, our journey now follows the Nile once again, southward into a landscape where entire kingdoms rose, flourished, and faded from memory. Here, among the windswept plains of Sudan, not far from the ancient royal city of Meroe, lie the enigmatic Hammurabi ruins. At first glance, they appear quiet and unassuming. Yet beneath their weathered stones rests a story that remains only partially understood, a story intertwined with one of Africa's most mysterious civilizations. The ruins stand in a region where the desert and the river have shaped human history for thousands of years. During the early morning hours, long shadows stretch across broken walls and scattered foundations. Fragments of ancient structures emerge from the earth, their outlines softened by centuries of wind-blown sand. The landscape feels timeless, almost detached from the modern world. And perhaps that is fitting. For Hammurabi belongs to a civilization that still guards many of its secrets. The site is generally associated with the kingdom of Kush, specifically the later Meroitic period, which flourished from roughly the 3rd century BC through the 4th century AD. By this time, the Kushite kingdom had developed into a powerful and sophisticated state centered along the Nile. Its rulers constructed pyramids, maintained extensive trade networks, and created a distinctive culture that blended local traditions with influences from Egypt, the Mediterranean world, and sub-Saharan Africa. Yet, despite these achievements, much about Meroitic civilization remains frustratingly difficult to understand. One reason is simple but profound. The Meroites left behind their own written language, known today as Meroitic script. Scholars have succeeded in deciphering parts of the writing system itself. Individual symbols can often be read phonetically. Certain names, titles, and recurring words have been identified, but the language remains only partially understood. Imagine standing before a library where every book can be pronounced aloud, yet most of the meanings remain locked away. That is the challenge researchers face when studying many Meroitic inscriptions, and Hammurabi sits at the center of this puzzle. Among the most significant discoveries at the site is a monumental inscription commissioned by a ruler known as Queen Amanirenas, one of the most famous leaders in Kushite history. The inscription appears to commemorate military victories and important political events. Yet because the language itself is only partially understood, scholars cannot fully reconstruct its message. What details remain hidden within those lines of text? What stories of warfare, diplomacy, religion, or daily life have remained silent for nearly 2,000 years? The unanswered questions transform even ordinary stones into mysteries. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence of substantial architecture, including walls, public buildings, and ceremonial spaces. These discoveries suggest that Hammurabi was not a minor settlement, but an important center connected to the broader political landscape of the Kushite kingdom. Yet many aspects of its role remain uncertain. Was it primarily an administrative center, a ceremonial site, a regional hub for trade and governance? Or did it serve multiple functions that shifted over time? The surviving remains provide clues, but not certainty. Adding to the mystery is the broader challenge of reconstructing Kushite history itself. Compared to neighboring civilizations, relatively few written records have survived in forms that can be fully understood. As a result, archaeologists often rely heavily on architecture, artifacts, burial practices, and foreign accounts to piece together the story. But foreign observers rarely tell the whole story. Their descriptions reflect outside perspectives, political biases, and limited knowledge. The voices of the Kushites themselves remain frustratingly distant, preserved in inscriptions that modern scholars can read but not completely comprehend. This gap in understanding has naturally encouraged speculation. Some researchers believe that future breakthroughs in deciphering the Meroitic language could dramatically transform our understanding of the kingdom. Entire chapters of history may currently exist in plain sight, carved into stone, yet effectively unreadable. Others wonder whether undiscovered archives remain buried beneath the sands near sites like Hammurabi. If such records exist, they could provide unprecedented insights into one of Africa's greatest ancient civilizations. There are also more speculative theories. A few independent researchers have suggested that the Kushites possessed forms of political organization, religious philosophy, or scientific knowledge that have been underestimated because so much of their written record remains inaccessible. Others speculate that important cultural traditions disappeared during periods of political decline, leaving behind monuments whose original meanings have become obscured by time. Such ideas remain difficult to verify, yet they arise from a simple reality. When large portions of a civilization's own voice remain unreadable, uncertainty naturally fills the gaps. Perhaps nowhere is this uncertainty felt more strongly than when standing among the ruins themselves. The stones remain silent. The inscriptions remain incomplete. The people who built these structures have been gone for centuries, yet traces of their presence endure everywhere. Every carved block, every fragment of pottery, every weathered foundation hints at a larger story waiting just beyond our reach. As the desert wind moves through the ruins and sunlight illuminates inscriptions whose meanings remain only partially known, Hammurabi becomes more than an archaeological site. It becomes a reminder of how fragile knowledge can be. Entire kingdoms can leave behind monuments, cities, and written records, and still remain mysterious. And perhaps that is the most haunting aspect of Hammurabi. The answers may not be lost forever. They may already be here, etched into stone and buried beneath the sand, waiting for the moment when someone finally learns how to listen. Until then, the ruins remain suspended between discovery and silence, guarding secrets from a civilization that continues to speak in a language the modern world has not yet fully understood. What forgotten histories might emerge if those silent words are ever unlocked? If the Hammurabi ruins remind us that entire civilizations can leave behind voices we are still learning to understand, then our path now turns once again toward the arid landscapes of Mesopotamia, where the earliest chapters of urban civilization were written in stone, clay, and memory. Here, in what is now eastern Syria near the banks of the Euphrates River, lies the ancient city of Mari. From above, the site appears as a vast, weathered expanse of earth and broken walls, an unassuming rise in the desert that belies its former significance as one of the great political and cultural centers of the ancient Near East. To stand at Mari today is to stand in silence broken only by wind. The ruins stretch across the landscape in uneven layers of mud brick, forming the remains of palaces, temples, administrative quarters, and residential districts. The desert light reveals subtle contours of streets that once bustled with activity. Though time has reduced much of the city to fragments, the scale of what once stood here is still visible, suggesting a metropolis of remarkable organization and influence. Mari flourished particularly during the early 2nd millennium BC, reaching its height around 1800 BC under the rule of King Zimri-Lim. At its peak, it was a strategic hub connecting trade routes between Mesopotamia, the Levant, and regions farther west and south. Goods, ideas, and political messages passed through its gates, linking distant civilizations in ways that shaped the ancient world. Yet what makes Mari extraordinary is not only its political importance, but the sheer volume of written records discovered within its ruins. Tens of thousands of clay tablets were uncovered in the remains of the royal palace. These texts form one of the most extensive archives ever found from the ancient Near East. They contain administrative records, diplomatic correspondence, economic transactions, and detailed reports sent directly to the king. Through them, historians have been able to reconstruct a vivid portrait of court life. We see officials reporting on troop movements, merchants negotiating trade agreements, priests interpreting omens, and messengers traveling across vast distances to deliver urgent news. And yet, despite this wealth of information, many aspects of Mari's world remain surprisingly elusive. The palace itself, a sprawling complex of courtyards and halls, appears designed not only for governance but also for control, both political and symbolic. Some chambers suggest ceremonial functions that are still debated. Others appear to have been used for highly structured administrative processes that reflect an unusually advanced level of bureaucracy for its time. But what exactly did life feel like inside those walls? We can read the messages. We can trace the decisions. We can follow the movements of armies and caravans. Yet the lived experience, the atmosphere of the city, the emotional texture of its court, the unrecorded realities of daily life, remains just beyond reach. And then there is the question of Mari's abrupt and violent end. Around 1760 BC, the city was destroyed by Hammurabi of Babylon during his campaigns to unify Mesopotamia under his rule. Archaeological layers reveal evidence of fire, collapse, and sudden abandonment. The palace that once housed kings and archives was reduced to ruins, sealing many of its records beneath destruction. But even here, the story is not entirely straightforward. Some scholars note that the destruction layers are complex, suggesting multiple phases of collapse rather than a single moment of catastrophe. Others point to evidence that certain parts of the city may have been partially reoccupied or repurposed after its fall. The transition from thriving capital to ruined settlement may have been more gradual and more complicated than traditional narratives suggest. What truly happened in Mari's final years? And how much of its decline was shaped by political conquest versus internal transformation or environmental pressure? The uncertainty deepens when considering what may still remain buried beneath the desert. Despite extensive excavation, only portions of the ancient city have been fully uncovered. Large areas remain unexplored, sealed under layers of earth accumulated over nearly 4 millennia. Archaeologists continue to recover fragments, broken seals, scattered inscriptions, architectural remains, but it is widely understood that what we see today is only a partial glimpse of the original city. This has led some researchers to wonder what still lies hidden beneath the unexcavated sections. Could there be additional archives waiting to be discovered? Texts that might further illuminate Mari's role in regional politics? Might there be royal records that fill gaps in our understanding of its final decades? Or perhaps entire residential districts preserved beneath the sand, still containing traces of everyday life frozen in time? More speculative theories extend even further. A few independent voices have suggested that Mari may have played an even more complex role in early diplomatic networks than currently understood, possibly serving as a key node in exchanges that connected multiple ancient powers in ways not fully recorded in surviving texts. Others propose that the destruction of the city may have resulted in the loss of critical knowledge systems, administrative, cultural, or technological, that were never fully transmitted to later civilizations. These ideas remain outside mainstream interpretation, yet they reflect a broader truth. Mari's archive, as vast as it is, may still be incomplete. Standing among the ruins today, it is difficult not to imagine the city as it once was. The sound of scribes recording royal decrees, the movement of envoys crossing courtyards, the quiet tension of decisions that shaped entire regions. And beneath it all, the steady accumulation of clay tablets preserving fragments of a world that once felt permanent, yet ultimately proved fragile. But even those fragments raise new questions. If so much of Mari has been recovered, why does it still feel like only part of a larger story? What voices were never recorded? What events were never written down? And how much of its true history still lies beneath the sands of the Euphrates Valley, waiting for the moment when the desert decides to reveal it? If Mari reveals how even the most carefully preserved archives can still leave gaps in human understanding, then our journey now shifts once more toward the edge of desert highlands and ancient frontier landscapes. Here, overlooking the arid expanses of the Negev region in southern Palestine, lies Tel Arad Fortress, a site where stone, silence, and time converge into one of the most intriguing military and religious complexes of the ancient world. From a distance, Tel Arad appears as a series of low, sun-bleached ruins scattered across a barren plateau. The landscape is stark, almost unforgiving. Wind moves freely across the site, carrying dust through the remains of walls that once defined a carefully planned settlement. Yet beneath this quiet exterior lies a dual structure that continues to challenge how we understand the ancient societies that once occupied this region. Tel Arad is not a single city, but two connected layers of history. At the lower site, archaeologists uncovered an early Canaanite city that dates back to the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BC. Here, remnants of houses, streets, storage systems, and fortifications reveal a once thriving urban center engaged in trade and regional interaction. The layout suggests deliberate planning, an organized settlement shaped by both economic necessity and defensive concerns. Yet this city was eventually abandoned, leaving behind only traces of its former life. Above it, on a nearby hill, rises the later Israelite fortress, constructed centuries afterward during the Iron Age. This upper fortress, built around the 9th to 6th centuries BC, served as a military outpost guarding key desert routes. Its walls enclose a structured complex of storerooms, barracks, administrative rooms, and one of the most remarkable discoveries in the region, a small, carefully constructed temple. It is here that Tel Arad becomes something more than a military installation. Inside the fortress temple, archaeologists discovered a sanctuary that appears to mirror, in miniature, broader religious practices of the time. The structure includes a Holy of Holies, an altar, standing stones, and evidence of ritual activity. Fragments of inscriptions and pottery suggest that offerings were made here, possibly by soldiers stationed far from major urban centers. Yet one of the most striking aspects of this temple is its apparent intentional closure. At some point in the 6th century BC, the sanctuary appears to have been deliberately sealed. Stones were carefully placed, objects left behind, and the space effectively abandoned. Unlike sudden destruction caused by conflict, this closure suggests a controlled, meaningful act. But the reasons remain uncertain. Why would a functioning temple be intentionally shut down? Was it part of a broader religious reform? A shift in centralized worship practices? A response to political change or external pressure? Or did it reflect something more localized, decisions made by the soldiers and administrators stationed at the fortress itself? The archaeological record offers clues, but no definitive answer. And so, the temple remains frozen in time, not destroyed, but paused. Outside the sanctuary, the fortress reveals a highly organized system of administration. Ostraca, inscribed pottery shards, have been found in large quantities, containing records of supplies, orders, names, and logistical instructions. These texts provide a rare glimpse into the daily functioning of a frontier military system. Through them, we see the rhythm of life at Tel Arad, the distribution of oil and grain, the movement of soldiers, the coordination of supply routes stretching across the desert. Yet even these records raise deeper questions. How extensive was the communication network connecting Tel Arad to other fortresses and cities? How did information travel across such harsh terrain with relative efficiency? And how much of this administrative system still lies undocumented beneath surrounding sites yet to be fully excavated? The fortress itself occupies a strategic position overlooking ancient trade and military routes. Its placement suggests careful planning, designed to monitor movement through the desert corridor. But beyond its practical function, some researchers have noted subtle architectural patterns that raise further questions. Certain alignments within the fortress seem to correspond with sight lines toward distant landmarks. Some structures appear arranged with a precision that may reflect not only military considerations, but also symbolic or ritual intentions. Could the fortress have been more than a defensive outpost? Could it have embodied both administrative and ceremonial roles in ways that are not yet fully understood? Mainstream archaeology tends to interpret these features within the framework of military logistics and evolving religious practices of the Iron Age. The evidence supports a structured, state-controlled installation operating within a broader regional system. But gaps remain. Not all aspects of Tel Arad fit neatly into established interpretations. The coexistence of military infrastructure and sacred space within a single compact fortress continues to invite discussion. Why was such importance placed on maintaining a temple within a remote desert garrison? What role did ritual play in sustaining soldiers stationed far from major population centers? And why was the sanctuary eventually closed, while the fortress itself continued to function for some time afterward? Some speculative interpretations suggest that the temple may have represented a transitional stage in religious practice, reflecting shifting ideologies during a period of political consolidation. Others propose that the fortress may have served as a controlled religious node, where practices were regulated in accordance with broader administrative reforms. More distant theories, rarely accepted in academic circles, suggest that the combination of sacred and military space at Tel Arad reflects traditions far older than the Iron Age context in which they appear. These ideas remain unproven, yet they persist as part of ongoing attempts to interpret the site's unusual dual identity. As the sun sets over the desert plateau, the ruins of Tel Arad take on a different character. Shadows lengthen across the stone foundations. The outlines of walls and rooms blur into the landscape. The fortress no longer feels like a place of administration or worship, but something suspended between functions, its purpose partially understood, partially lost. And perhaps that is what makes Tel Arad endure in the archaeological imagination. It is a site where history is not fully written, but partially inferred, where a temple was carefully sealed rather than destroyed, where military records reveal structure, yet not intention, where two cities, one beneath the other, speak in layers that still resist complete interpretation. Standing among these ruins, one final question emerges quietly, almost inevitably. How many decisions made here, in this remote desert fortress, still shape the fragments of history we are only now beginning to piece together, and what remains buried beneath the sands, waiting for its story to be told? If Tellerrad leaves us contemplating the delicate balance between ritual, order, and abandonment in the ancient world, our path now turns eastward once more, across mountains and river valleys into the heart of ancient Persia. Here, in the fertile landscape of modern-day Iran, lie the ruins of Bishapur, a city once built with ambition, precision, and a vision of empire that sought to rival the great powers of antiquity. At first approach, Bishapur does not reveal itself easily. Nestled within a valley carved by the Shapur River and surrounded by rugged cliffs, the ruins unfold gradually across the landscape. Stone foundations trace the outlines of streets, courtyards, and monumental structures. Scattered columns rise from the earth like fractured memories of a vanished grandeur. Nearby, carved reliefs are etched directly into the rock face, their figures still visible despite nearly 2 millennia of erosion. This was once a royal city of the Sasanian Empire. Founded in the 3rd century AD by King Shapur I, Bishapur represented a bold experiment in urban planning and imperial expression. Unlike older cities that grew organically over centuries, Bishapur was carefully designed. Its layout reflects a combination of Persian architectural traditions and influences drawn from Roman engineering, likely inspired by captured Roman artisans following Shapur's military campaigns. At its peak, Bishapur was more than a city. It was a statement. It symbolized power, conquest, and cultural synthesis at a time when empires clashed across vast territories, stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Yet even with its strong historical framework, Bishapur continues to raise questions that are not easily resolved. One of the most striking features of the site is its complex system of relief carvings. On nearby cliffs, detailed rock reliefs depict royal ceremonies, military victories, and scenes of imperial authority. One particularly famous relief is believed to represent Shapur I's triumph over Roman emperors, a visual declaration of dominance carved permanently into stone. The figures appear precise, deliberate, and symbolic, designed not only to record events, but to communicate authority across generations. Yet interpretation is not always straightforward. Some details within the reliefs remain open to debate. The positioning of figures, the gestures, and certain symbolic elements have led scholars to differing interpretations about what exactly is being depicted. Are these purely historical representations of known events, or do they also incorporate ideological or religious symbolism that modern viewers are only partially equipped to decode? The city itself adds another layer to the mystery. Archaeological excavations reveal an unusually sophisticated urban design. Bishapur includes a central crossroads planned in a precise geometric layout, a palace complex, temples, and residential districts. Water management systems, including channels and reservoirs, demonstrate advanced engineering capabilities that allowed the city to thrive in a challenging environment. Yet despite this apparent order, parts of the site remain difficult to fully reconstruct. Large sections of the city have not been completely excavated. Some structures appear damaged in ways that suggest either natural decay, seismic activity, or possible conflict. However, the exact sequence of events that led to Bishapur's decline is not fully agreed upon. Was the city gradually abandoned as political priorities shifted within the Sasanian Empire? Did environmental factors, such as changes in water supply or regional climate conditions, contribute to its decline? Or was its fate shaped by events that left only partial traces in the archaeological record? The answers remain incomplete. Adding to the intrigue are underground structures and tunnel-like passages discovered in and around the site. Some of these spaces appear to have served ceremonial or functional purposes, though their exact roles are still debated. In certain areas, carvings and architectural features suggest that these underground elements may have held symbolic importance beyond their practical use. What was the experience of moving through these spaces? Were they designed for ritual processions, administrative functions, or defensive strategies? Or did they serve multiple purposes that shifted over time as the city evolved? The blending of cultural influences at Bishapur also continues to attract attention. The city reflects a convergence of Persian, Roman, and local artistic traditions. This fusion is visible not only in architecture but also in decorative motifs and sculptural styles. While mainstream interpretations view this as evidence of cultural exchange following military conquest and diplomatic interaction, some researchers suggest that Bishapur may represent a more complex process of adaptation and integration than is fully understood. How did people living in the city perceive this blending of traditions? Was it embraced as a symbol of imperial strength, or did it reflect deeper cultural negotiations that remain invisible in the surviving record? Over time, more speculative interpretations have emerged. A few independent theories suggest that Bishapur may have held additional ceremonial or astronomical significance, pointing to alignments in certain architectural elements. Others propose that underground features might conceal yet undiscovered chambers or inscriptions that could alter current understandings of the site. These ideas remain outside mainstream consensus, but they reflect a broader reality. Bishapur still holds unanswered questions. As the sun moves across the cliffs and shadows stretch over carved stone figures, the city seems to shift between visibility and concealment. Reliefs that once proclaimed imperial victory now appear softened by time. Streets that once echoed with movement are now silent. And beneath it all lies the sense that not everything about Bishapur has yet been revealed. Perhaps most intriguing is the possibility that future discoveries could still reshape what we think we know about the city. Unexcavated areas may contain additional inscriptions, architectural remains, or objects that provide clearer insight into its political, cultural, and spiritual life. Until then, Bishapur remains suspended in a delicate balance between certainty and mystery. A city once built to declare permanence now exists as a reminder of how even the most powerful civilizations can fade into partial understanding. And as we walk among its ruins today, one question continues to linger quietly in the air. How much of Bishapur's story is still buried beneath the earth, waiting for the moment when history chooses to speak again? If Bishapur reveals how empires once shaped cities with intention and symbolism, then our journey now moves into something far more fragile, something less like a monument to power and more like a moment preserved in time itself. High in the Zagros Mountains of northwestern Iran, Hasanlu Hill rises gently above the surrounding plains. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, a simple earthen mound shaped by centuries of wind, rain, and forgotten settlements buried beneath its surface. Yet beneath this quiet hill lies one of the most haunting archaeological discoveries ever made. The silence here is deceptive. From the outside, Hasanlu is just another tell, a mound formed by layers of human occupation accumulated over thousands of years. But beneath it lies a sequence of cities, each built upon the ruins of the one before it, each layer preserving fragments of lives that once moved through its streets. The most famous of these layers belongs to the late 2nd millennium BC, a settlement that met a sudden and violent end. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of a fortified city, complete with streets, houses, workshops, and a central citadel. Pottery fragments, weapons, jewelry, and household items were found scattered across rooms and passageways, many still in the positions where they fell during the city's final moments. And then, there were the human remains. Among the most striking discoveries at Hasanlu is a group of individuals found locked in place at the moment of destruction. One of the most widely known scenes shows a man cradling another figure as they collapse together, preserved not in sculpture or myth, but in the suddenness of catastrophe. Nearby, other bodies were found in positions suggesting attempts to flee, resist, or hide. What happened here? The evidence suggests a sudden attack, likely around 800 BC, though the exact date and identity of the attackers remain subjects of scholarly debate. Some theories propose regional conflict between competing kingdoms of the Iron Age. Others suggest incursions by external forces moving through the mountainous corridors that connected different parts of the ancient Near East. But while the cause of destruction may be partially understood, the emotional reality of that moment remains locked in silence. What did the inhabitants experience in those final hours? What decisions were made as chaos unfolded within the citadel? The archaeological record preserves the aftermath, but not the narrative that led to it. The citadel itself, where much of the most dramatic evidence was found, appears to have been a complex administrative and possibly ceremonial center. Rooms contained storage vessels, metal tools, and finely crafted objects that suggest a society with established trade networks and skilled artisans. Gold ornaments and carved ivory fragments indicate access to luxury materials, pointing to a community that was far from isolated. Yet Hasanlu was not simply a wealthy settlement. It was a fortified stronghold, built with defensive structures designed to withstand siege or attack. And still, it fell. One of the most puzzling aspects of Hasanlu is the abruptness of its destruction layer. Unlike sites that show gradual decline or repeated rebuilding after conflict, Hasanlu appears to capture a single, catastrophic moment. Fire swept through the upper levels of the citadel, collapsing structures and sealing artifacts beneath debris. The intensity of the destruction suggests a rapid and overwhelming event. But even here, questions remain. Why was the city so suddenly overwhelmed? Was it the result of a large-scale invasion, or a smaller, more targeted conflict that escalated beyond control? Could internal instability have weakened its defenses before the attack even began? Or was Hasanlu simply in the wrong place at the wrong moment in a shifting political landscape that has left only faint traces in the historical record? The human remains continue to shape how the site is understood. Unlike many ancient sites where bodies are scattered or deliberately buried, Hasanlu preserves individuals in situ, caught within collapsed rooms, corridors, and stairways. Their positions suggest urgency, confusion, and final attempts at survival. Some were found near doorways, others in enclosed spaces that may have served as last refuges. And yet, there is something quietly unresolved about these scenes. Without written records from the city itself, the people of Hasanlu cannot speak directly to us. There are no surviving texts that explain who they were, how they governed themselves, or how they understood the world around them. Everything must be inferred from material remains. This absence creates space for interpretation, and occasionally, speculation. Some researchers have suggested that Hasanlu may have been part of a broader network of highland cultures that played a more significant role in regional politics than traditionally assumed. Others propose that the site reflects a complex interaction between sedentary communities and mobile groups, whose movements through the mountains are still poorly understood. More speculative ideas, rarely accepted in academic circles, have even suggested that Hasanlu preserves evidence of ritualized behavior during times of crisis, interpretations based on the arrangement of certain objects and the unusual positioning of some remains. These theories remain controversial and unproven, but they reflect the difficulty of fully reconstructing a moment so sudden, so complete, and so silent. What remains certain is this: Hasanlu was a living city that ended in an instant of irreversible destruction. And yet, it was not erased. It was preserved. The fire that consumed its buildings also sealed them. The collapse that ended its activity also protected its final moment from the passage of time. In a paradoxical way, catastrophe became preservation. Today, standing above Hasanlu Hill, there is little visible indication of what lies beneath. The earth appears calm, almost ordinary. But beneath that surface rests a city frozen at the edge of collapse, a place where human lives were interrupted mid-motion, never to continue. And so the mystery persists, not only in the question of who destroyed Hassanlu, but in the deeper uncertainty of what life there truly looked like before that final moment arrived. What stories remain locked within its buried rooms, and how much of its history still waits beneath the soil just beyond the reach of excavation, as if the hill itself is holding its breath. If Hassanlu Hill preserves a single frozen moment of human collapse, then our path now moves across continents and oceans, rising into the high Andes of South America, where silence takes on a different form. Here, in the rugged highlands of northern Peru, perched dramatically on a remote mountain ridge, lies Marca Huamachuco. Even from a distance, it feels less like a ruin and more like something deliberately placed between earth and sky, as if its builders intended it to be seen from horizons long before travelers could ever reach it. The wind is constant here. It moves across stone corridors, through collapsed walls, and over vast ceremonial enclosures that once formed one of the most important high-altitude centers of pre-Inca civilization. At nearly 3,600 meters above sea level, Marca Huamachuco rises above valleys often hidden in mist, isolated from the surrounding world. And yet, in its time, it was anything but isolated. Between roughly AD 400 and AD 800, Marca Huamachuco flourished as a major political and religious center in the northern Andes. Archaeological evidence suggests a society capable of remarkable architectural achievement, organizing labor on a scale that transformed an entire mountaintop into a complex ceremonial landscape. Massive stone walls encircle expansive plazas. Narrow corridors wind between circular and rectangular structures. Some enclosures appear defensive, while others seem clearly ceremonial in nature. The entire site is constructed with an intention that is still being decoded by archaeologists today. But what was Marca Huamachuco exactly? Was it a city in the conventional sense, or something more specialized? Perhaps a sacred center that drew pilgrims from distant regions? Or was it both at different points in its history, evolving as political and religious needs changed over time? Mainstream archaeology suggests that Marca Huamachuco functioned as a ceremonial and administrative hub for regional elites in the northern highlands, predating and possibly influencing later Andean civilizations, including the Wari and ultimately the Inca. Its monumental architecture reflects a society capable of organizing large-scale construction projects without the use of mortar, relying instead on precisely fitted stonework that has endured for over 1,000 years. Yet despite this understanding, many aspects of the site remain unresolved. One of the most striking features is its labyrinth-like design. Unlike cities with clearly defined grids or linear planning, Marca Huamachuco appears intentionally complex. Corridors narrow unexpectedly. Walls enclose open spaces in patterns that are difficult to interpret from a purely functional perspective. Some structures seem to lead nowhere, while others open into vast ceremonial spaces that dominate the ridge. Why build such a place in such a remote and elevated environment? What purpose did this architectural complexity serve? Some researchers suggest that the layout may have been designed to create controlled movement through sacred spaces, guiding participants through ritual experiences that unfolded gradually as they moved deeper into the complex. In this interpretation, the architecture itself becomes part of a ceremonial narrative, shaping perception, anticipation, and meaning. Others propose more practical explanations, suggesting that the site's complexity reflects layers of construction over centuries, with each generation adding new structures without fully removing the old. Over time, this accumulation could have created the labyrinthine form we see today. Both interpretations may hold elements of truth, yet neither fully explains the emotional impact of the site when experienced firsthand. Another enduring mystery lies in Marca Huamachuco's role within regional networks. Despite its remote location, Evidence suggests it was connected to distant populations through trade, pilgrimage, and political alliances. Artifacts found at the site include materials not native to the immediate region, indicating long-distance exchange networks that linked the highlands with coastal and jungle regions. But how extensive were these connections? Was Marcahuamachuco a central node in a larger political system that has not yet been fully reconstructed? Or was it one of several competing ceremonial centers whose relationships remain unclear due to the fragmentary nature of the archaeological record? The site's construction also raises deeper questions about labor and organization. Building such massive stone structures at high altitude would have required coordinated effort, sustained over generations. Yet there is little evidence of permanent urban density comparable to major lowland cities. This suggests a society that may have mobilized labor seasonally or ceremonially, drawing people together for specific purposes before dispersing again across the highlands. What kind of social structure supports such a system? And what beliefs were strong enough to bring thousands of people together in such a challenging environment? Within the ruins, archaeologists have also identified burial sites and human remains that hint at complex ritual practices. Some chambers appear to have been used for funerary purposes, possibly reserved for elites or individuals of significant status. The placement of these burials within the architectural layout suggests a close relationship between death, ancestry, and sacred space. Yet interpretation remains uncertain. Were these individuals rulers, priests, or symbolic figures within a broader cosmological system? And how did their presence within the architecture influence how the site was experienced by those who lived and visited there? Over time, Marcahuamachuco was eventually abandoned. By the time of the Inca expansion centuries later, the site was already in ruins, though still recognized as a place of significance. The reasons for its decline remain unclear. Environmental shifts, political changes, or the reorganization of regional power structures have all been proposed as possible factors. But no single explanation fully accounts for the site's gradual disappearance from active use. As centuries passed, stone structures collapsed, walls eroded, ceremonial spaces filled with debris and vegetation. The once active mountaintop slowly transformed into a quiet landscape of ruins, its original purpose fading from memory. And yet, Marcahuamachuco was never entirely forgotten. Local traditions preserved echoes of its presence. Archaeologists rediscovered its scale and complexity only in recent times, revealing a site far larger and more intricate than early reports had suggested. Even today, large portions remain unexcavated, their contents still hidden beneath layers of stone and earth. This raises a lingering possibility. If so much has already been uncovered, what still remains beneath the surface? Could undiscovered chambers reveal new insights into its rituals, leadership, or social organization? Might further excavation reshape our understanding of how highland societies developed in the centuries before the Inca Empire rose to prominence? Or does Marcahuamachuco represent something even more elusive, a cultural memory preserved not fully in texts or objects, but in architecture that continues to resist complete interpretation? Standing among its towering walls, with clouds drifting below the ridge and wind passing through empty corridors, the site feels suspended between presence and absence. It is clearly human in origin, yet not fully human in comprehension. Built with intention, yet not entirely understood in purpose. And so the question remains, echoing through the stone passages and open plazas of this mountaintop complex. What kind of world created Marcahuamachuco? And how much of that world is still waiting, hidden in the high Andes, for its story to be fully revealed? If Marcahuamachuco leaves us suspended between sky and stone, between ritual and forgotten intention, then our journey now turns northward once again, crossing mountains, deserts, and river valleys into a landscape where some of the earliest known urban life in Central Asia first began to take shape. Here, In the fertile valley of the Zarafshan River in present-day Tajikistan lies Sarazm, a settlement so ancient that it predates many of the great civilizations that would later dominate the surrounding world. At first glance, Sarazm appears almost gentle. Low mounds rise from the valley floor, surrounded by fields and distant mountains that frame the horizon in pale blue silence. There is nothing immediately monumental here, no towering walls or dramatic stone structures that announce themselves to the modern eye. And yet beneath this quiet landscape lies one of the earliest known examples of long-distance cultural interaction in Eurasia. Sarazm flourished between roughly 3,500 and 2000 BC, during a period when human societies across vast regions were beginning to shift from isolated agricultural communities into interconnected networks of trade and exchange. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Sarazm was not a small village, but a significant proto-urban settlement, covering multiple hectares and organized into distinct residential, industrial, and ceremonial zones. It is here that one of the most intriguing paradoxes of early civilization begins to emerge. Sarazm is both local and global. On one hand, it reflects a community rooted in its valley environment, relying on agriculture, livestock, and local resources. On the other, it shows clear evidence of contact with distant regions, stretching toward the Iranian Plateau, the Indus Valley, and the broader cultures of Central Asia. Artifacts discovered at the site include copper objects, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and ceramics whose styles suggest far-reaching exchange networks. Some materials clearly originated hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, raising questions about how such long-distance connections were maintained during this early period of human development. How did goods, ideas, and technologies travel across such vast and difficult terrain? And what kind of social systems were required to sustain these networks long before the rise of later empires? The architecture of Sarazm adds another layer of complexity. Excavations have uncovered multi-room structures, workshops for metallurgy, and areas that appear to have been used for communal or ceremonial purposes. Some buildings show evidence of specialized craft production, particularly in metalworking and bead-making, suggesting a degree of occupational organization not always associated with such early settlements. Yet despite these discoveries, the full layout of the settlement is still not completely understood. Large portions remain unexcavated, and the relationship between different zones is still being reconstructed. Some areas appear residential, while others suggest administrative or ritual functions, but clear boundaries between these categories are difficult to define. Was Sarazm organized according to early forms of urban planning, or did it evolve gradually through organic growth over centuries of occupation? The answer remains open. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sarazm is its role as a cultural crossroads. Evidence suggests that it existed at the meeting point of multiple ancient traditions. The settlement appears to have been influenced by agricultural communities from the Iranian Plateau, pastoral groups from the steppes, and early urban cultures developing toward the Indus Valley. Rather than belonging to a single cultural identity, Sarazm seems to reflect a blending of multiple influences. But this raises a deeper question. Was Sarazm simply a passive recipient of cultural exchange, or did it actively shape the networks it participated in? Some researchers suggest that it may have functioned as a hub, a place where goods were not only exchanged, but also redistributed, reinterpreted, and transformed. In this view, Sarazm becomes more than a settlement. It becomes a node in an early system of interaction that helped shape the trajectory of civilization across a vast region. Yet, not all aspects of the site fit neatly into this framework. Certain burial practices uncovered at Sarazm have drawn particular attention. Graves containing elaborate goods, including jewelry and finely crafted objects, suggest social differentiation within the community. Some individuals appear to have been buried with significant wealth, while others were interred more simply. What determined these differences? Were they based on status, occupation, family lineage, or something more symbolic that is not yet fully understood? And what beliefs surrounded death in a society so early in the development of urban life? If Marcahuamachuco leaves us suspended between sky and stone, between ritual and forgotten intention, then our journey now turns northward once again, crossing mountains, deserts, and river valleys into a landscape where some of the earliest known urban life in Central Asia first began to take shape. Here, in the fertile valley of the Zarafshan River in present-day Tajikistan, lies Sarazm, a settlement so ancient that it predates many of the great civilizations that would later dominate the surrounding world. At first glance, Sarazm appears almost gentle. Low mounds rise from the valley floor, surrounded by fields and distant mountains that frame the horizon in pale blue silence. There is nothing immediately monumental here, no towering walls or dramatic stone structures that announce themselves to the modern eye. And yet beneath this quiet landscape lies one of the earliest known examples of long-distance cultural interaction in Eurasia. Sarazm flourished between roughly 3,500 and 2000 BC, during a period when human societies across vast regions were beginning to shift from isolated agricultural communities into interconnected networks of trade and exchange. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Sarazm was not a small village, but a significant proto-urban settlement, covering multiple hectares and organized into distinct residential, industrial, and ceremonial zones. It is here that one of the most intriguing paradoxes of early civilization begins to emerge. Sarazm is both local and global. On one hand, it reflects a community rooted in its valley environment, relying on agriculture, livestock, and local resources. On the other, it shows clear evidence of contact with distant regions, stretching toward the Iranian Plateau, the Indus Valley, and the broader cultures of Central Asia. Artifacts discovered at the site include copper objects, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and ceramics whose styles suggest far-reaching exchange networks. Some materials clearly originated hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, raising questions about how such long-distance connections were maintained during this early period of human development. How did goods, ideas, and technologies travel across such vast and difficult terrain? And what kind of social systems were required to sustain these networks long before the rise of later empires? The architecture of Sarazm adds another layer of complexity. Excavations have uncovered multi-room structures, workshops for metallurgy, and areas that appear to have been used for communal or ceremonial purposes. Some buildings show evidence of specialized craft production, particularly in metalworking and bead-making, suggesting a degree of occupational organization not always associated with such early settlements. Yet despite these discoveries, the full layout of the settlement is still not completely understood. Large portions remain unexcavated, and the relationship between different zones is still being reconstructed. Some areas appear residential, while others suggest administrative or ritual functions, but clear boundaries between these categories are difficult to define. Was Sarazm organized according to early forms of urban planning, or did it evolve gradually through organic growth over centuries of occupation? The answer remains open. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sarazm is its role as a cultural crossroads. Evidence suggests that it existed at the meeting point of multiple ancient traditions. The settlement appears to have been influenced by agricultural communities from the Iranian Plateau, pastoral groups from the steppes, and early urban cultures developing toward the Indus Valley. Rather than belonging to a single cultural identity, Sarazm seems to reflect a blending of multiple influences. But this raises a deeper question. Was Sarazm simply a passive recipient of cultural exchange, or did it actively shape the networks it participated in? Some researchers suggest that it may have functioned as a hub, a place where goods were not only exchanged but also redistributed, reinterpreted, and transformed. In this view, Sarazm becomes more than a settlement. It becomes a node in an early system of interaction that helped shape the trajectory of civilization across a vast region. Yet not all aspects of the site fit neatly into this framework. Certain burial practices uncovered at Sarazm have drawn particular attention. Graves containing elaborate goods, including jewelry and finely crafted objects, suggest social differentiation within the community. Some individuals appear to have been buried with significant wealth, while others were interred more simply. What determined these differences? Were they based on status, occupation, family lineage, or something more symbolic that is not yet fully understood? And what beliefs surrounded death in a society so early in the development of urban life? If Sarazm reveals how early networks of exchange quietly reshaped the ancient world, then our journey now turns westward into the heart of the arid landscapes of Central Asia, where survival itself demanded ingenuity and vigilance. Here, on the edge of the Kizilkum Desert in present-day Uzbekistan, rise the stark and weathered ruins of Ayaz Kala, a chain of ancient fortresses perched upon windswept hills, overlooking vast plains that once marked the frontier between cultivated land and the unknown steppe. From a distance, Ayaz Kala appears almost unreal. 3 main fortress complexes rise from the desert, like the remains of a forgotten boundary system. Built atop natural hills, their mud-brick walls still trace the contours of defensive architecture designed to command visibility across immense distances. The wind moves freely here, carrying sand through collapsed corridors and empty watchtowers, as if the landscape itself is still patrolling a frontier long since abandoned. These structures were not built in isolation. Ayaz Kala belongs to a broader system of fortifications associated with the ancient Khwarezm civilization, which flourished in the region from roughly the 4th century BC through the early centuries AD. Positioned along routes connecting Central Asia with Persia and beyond, these desert strongholds formed part of a defensive and administrative network that protected agricultural settlements from nomadic incursions and helped regulate trade across the steppe. Yet even with this historical framework, Ayaz Kala continues to raise questions that are not easily resolved. The site is composed of multiple fortresses, each built in different periods, suggesting a long and evolving use of the landscape. Ayaz Kala I, the earliest and most imposing structure, sits highest on the hill, its massive rectangular walls enclosing what appears to have been a heavily fortified citadel. Lower down, Ayaz Kala II and III show later architectural adaptations, reflecting changing needs, technologies, and perhaps shifting political realities. But what exactly was life like within these walls? The fortresses were clearly designed for defense. Thick mud-brick walls, corner towers, and narrow entry points suggest a focus on controlling access and maintaining surveillance over the surrounding terrain. From the top of Ayaz Kala I, one can see vast stretches of desert and steppe, a visual command over an environment where movement could be detected from miles away. And yet, despite their military appearance, the function of these sites may not have been purely defensive. Archaeological findings indicate the presence of storage facilities, residential areas, and possibly administrative spaces. This suggests that Ayaz Kala may have served multiple roles, not only as a military outpost, but also as a center for regional governance, resource distribution, and possibly even seasonal habitation. Why build such complex structures in such a remote and harsh environment? One explanation is straightforward: control. The Khwarezm region depended heavily on irrigation agriculture along the Amu Darya river system. Protecting these fertile lands from nomadic groups would have been essential for sustaining the civilization. Fortresses like Ayaz Kala would have acted as both deterrents and observation points, ensuring stability in a volatile frontier zone. But even within this practical interpretation, certain details remain open to discussion. The scale of Ayaz Kala I, in particular, is striking. Its size and elevation suggest more than a simple military installation. Some researchers have proposed that it may have also functioned as a symbolic expression of authority, a visible statement of control over both land and movement. In this view, the fortress becomes not just a defensive structure, but a political marker embedded into the landscape itself. Others suggest a more layered interpretation. Could Ayaz Kala have served ceremonial functions alongside its defensive role? Some features within the complex hint at spaces that may have been used for gatherings or administrative rituals. While evidence remains limited, the possibility raises intriguing questions about how ancient Central Asian societies blended practical governance with symbolic or ritualized expressions of power. And then there is the question of continuity. The Ayaz Kala fortresses were used across several centuries, with modifications and rebuilding phases reflecting shifting political and environmental conditions. Yet at some point, they were abandoned. The exact reasons remain uncertain. Changes in trade routes, environmental shifts affecting agriculture, or broader political transformations in the region may all have contributed. But no single explanation fully accounts for the site's eventual silence. What happened to the communities that once maintained these structures? Did they migrate to more stable regions? Were they absorbed into emerging political entities? Or did the strategic importance of this desert frontier simply fade as larger regional systems evolved? The ruins themselves offer few direct answers. Inside the fortresses, traces of daily life remain preserved in fragments: pottery shards, remnants of storage vessels, and scattered architectural features that hint at once active spaces. Yet the absence of written records from the site leaves much of its story reconstructed through interpretation rather than direct testimony. This lack of textual evidence creates a gap that invites speculation. Some researchers propose that Ayaz Kala was part of a more extensive and interconnected defensive network than currently understood, one that may have coordinated across vast distances to monitor movement across Central Asia. Others suggest that its role may have shifted over time, from military stronghold to administrative center to symbolic ruin long before its final abandonment. More speculative interpretations occasionally extend further. A few independent theories suggest that desert fortress systems like Ayaz Kala may preserve architectural knowledge traditions that evolved independently from neighboring civilizations, reflecting a uniquely Central Asian approach to frontier organization. While these ideas remain unproven, they highlight how much of the region's historical development is still being pieced together from incomplete evidence. As the sun moves across the Kizilkum Desert, Ayaz Kala transforms once again. Shadows stretch across broken walls, and the outlines of towers blur into the horizon. From above, the fortresses appear as geometric scars in the landscape, remnants of human intention gradually reclaimed by wind and sand. And yet, even in this state of abandonment, the site does not feel entirely empty. It feels watched, not in a supernatural sense, but in the quiet persistence of history itself, the sense that these structures still hold within them patterns of movement, decision, and adaptation that have not yet been fully decoded. Every wall, every corridor, every elevated platform seems to suggest purpose, even when that purpose is no longer clearly visible. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Ayaz Kala is not how it was built, or even why it was abandoned, but how much of its function we still fail to fully grasp. What did it mean to live at the edge of an empire, where desert met cultivated land, where visibility meant survival, and where stone walls carried both protection and authority? And beneath the sand that continues to drift across its foundations, what other traces of that world still remain, waiting for the moment when the desert chooses to reveal them once more? If Ayaz Kala stands as a silent reminder of how civilizations once carved order into the edge of the desert, then our path now turns toward a very different landscape, one where layers of human history are not scattered across remote frontiers, but stacked directly upon one another in a single enduring mound. In the central coastal plain of what is now Israel, rising subtly above the surrounding fields, lies Gezer Mound. At first glance, it appears almost unremarkable, a gentle hill shaped by time and soil, surrounded by farmland and modern roads. Yet beneath this quiet rise lies one of the most complex and continuously occupied archaeological sites in the ancient Near East. The surface gives little away. Wind moves across cultivated fields. Birds circle above uneven ground. From a distance, Gezer Mound looks like any other natural elevation. But beneath it lies a stratified record of human settlement stretching back thousands of years, each layer preserving traces of cities built, destroyed, and rebuilt upon the ruins of those that came before. Gezer was occupied from the Chalcolithic period through the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age, with evidence of continuous or near-continuous habitation spanning millennia. Its strategic position along ancient trade routes connecting coastal regions with inland highlands made it a site of enduring importance. Whoever controlled Gezer controlled movement, commerce, and communication across a critical corridor of the ancient world. And yet, despite its importance, the story of Gezer is not a simple one of steady development. It is a story of cycles. Excavations have revealed massive fortification systems, city gates, water installations, residential districts, and ritual spaces. One of the most famous discoveries at the site is a series of monumental standing stones, often interpreted as cultic installations. Nearby, a large water system carved deep into the bedrock demonstrates advanced engineering designed to ensure access to groundwater during times of siege. These features suggest a society deeply concerned with both survival and structure, one that invested heavily in protecting its resources and maintaining continuity in a volatile region. But even with these discoveries, Gezer resists a single, unified interpretation. At various points in its history, the city appears to have been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Archaeological layers show clear signs of burning, collapse, and abandonment, followed by reconstruction phases that often introduce new architectural styles and cultural influences. Each destruction layer raises the same question: what forces were responsible for these repeated disruptions? Some evidence points toward military conquest. Ancient texts, including external inscriptions, reference campaigns that affected cities in this region. Gezer is mentioned in historical records associated with regional powers of the Bronze and Iron Ages, suggesting that it was caught within larger political struggles involving emerging kingdoms and imperial expansions. Yet not all destruction layers align neatly with known historical events. Some appear more abrupt than expected. Others lack clear external correlates. This has led researchers to consider a range of explanations, from localized conflict and internal instability to broader regional shifts that are still not fully understood. What makes Gezer particularly compelling is not just its repeated destruction, but its repeated rebirth. After each collapse, the city was rebuilt. Streets were realigned. New walls were constructed. Sacred spaces were redefined. The continuity suggests a population deeply attached to the location itself, returning again and again despite cycles of upheaval. Why? What made Gezer so essential that it could not simply be abandoned? Was it geography alone? Its position along vital routes between coast and inland regions? Or did the site hold cultural, religious, or symbolic significance that bound communities to it across generations? The water system beneath Gezer Mound adds another layer to this question. Carved deep into the limestone bedrock, the system consists of a massive shaft and descending tunnel designed to provide secure access to water even during siege conditions. Its construction required enormous labor and technical planning. Similar systems appear at other ancient sites in the region, But Geyser's example remains one of the most impressive and well-preserved. Yet even here, interpretation is not entirely settled. Was the system purely functional, designed strictly for survival? Or did it also carry symbolic meaning, perhaps representing control over one of the most essential and life-sustaining elements in the ancient world? The question of ritual at Geyser also remains open. The standing stones discovered at the site have long been associated with cultic or religious activity. Their arrangement suggests intentional placement, possibly connected to ceremonies or territorial markers. However, without accompanying inscriptions that fully explain their purpose, their meaning remains partially speculative. Were these stones part of organized religious practice? Did they represent ancestral commemoration, boundary markers, or something more complex that blended multiple functions? Mainstream archaeology tends to interpret Geyser within the framework of known regional cultures, including Canaanite, Egyptian, and later Israelite influences. Each layer reflects shifts in political control and cultural expression, creating a palimpsest of ancient identities. But the transitions between these layers are not always smooth. In some cases, cultural shifts appear gradual. In others, they seem more abrupt, raising questions about how populations changed, migrated, or adapted over time. Did entire communities move away and return later under different influences? Or did cultural identities shift within the same population, leaving behind overlapping material traces that are difficult to disentangle? More speculative interpretations occasionally suggest that Geyser may preserve evidence of longer-term regional interactions that are not fully represented in surviving texts. Some propose that the site functioned as a continuous meeting point between different cultural spheres, absorbing and reflecting influences in ways that standard historical narratives cannot fully capture. Others suggest that repeated cycles of destruction and rebuilding may reflect deeper systemic pressures, environmental changes, resource competition, or shifting trade dynamics that affected the entire region over centuries. None of these explanations are definitive, and perhaps none are complete on their own. As modern excavations continue, each layer of Geyser Mound reveals another fragment of its long and complex history. Pottery shards, architectural remains, and industrial traces accumulate into a picture that is rich but still incomplete. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more apparent it becomes that Geyser is not a single story, but many stories layered upon one another. Standing at the surface today, it is difficult to imagine the density of life buried beneath the soil. Cities rise and fall in place without ever truly disappearing. They remain, compressed into earth, waiting for interpretation. And so the mound remains. Quiet, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in depth. A place where history does not move forward in a straight line, but circles back upon itself, building, collapsing, rebuilding again. And as the wind moves across its surface, the question lingers in the silence. How many more cities lie beneath Geyser, and what do their buried layers still have to tell us about the forces that shaped this land across thousands of years? If Geyser Mound reminds us how entire civilizations can accumulate beneath a single stretch of earth, then our journey now moves far across the globe, beyond the ancient Near East, across oceans and archipelagos, into a landscape where history takes on an entirely different scale and silence. In the Kansai region of Japan, near the modern city of Sakai, lies one of the most extraordinary and least fully understood monumental burial complexes in the world, Daisen Kofun. At first glance, it is almost impossible to comprehend from the ground. What appears as a vast green expanse, an irregular patchwork of trees, waterways, and embankments, is in fact a massive burial mound, so large that its true shape is only visible from above. From the air, its form becomes unmistakable. A keyhole-shaped structure, part circular mound and part rectangular platform, surrounded by multiple concentric moats that reflect light like rings of still water. This is not a natural formation. It is a constructed landscape, built with intent, precision, and a scale that challenges easy comparison. Daisen Kofun is widely believed to be the tomb of Emperor Nintoku, a semi-legendary ruler of early Japan traditionally placed in the 5th century AD. According to historical tradition, Nintoku is remembered as a benevolent sovereign, associated with prosperity and reduced taxation during times of hardship. Yet beyond these accounts, much of his life, and even the certainty of his existence as described in early chronicles, remains wrapped in layers of myth and interpretation. And so the mound itself becomes the primary witness. Stretching approximately 486 meters in length, Daisen Kofun is among the largest tombs ever constructed anywhere in the world. Its scale is difficult to fully grasp without aerial perspective. The circular rear mound rises like a forested hill, while the rectangular front extends outward like a ceremonial platform. Together, they form a silhouette that is both geometric and organic, as though designed to merge human intention with natural landscape. But why such an enormous structure for a single individual? Mainstream archaeology interprets Daisen Kofun as the burial site of a powerful leader of the Yamato polity, an emerging political structure that would eventually evolve into the early Japanese state. The construction of such a monumental tomb reflects not only the authority of the ruler, but also the organizational capacity of the society that built it. Thousands, possibly tens of thousands of workers may have been involved in its construction. Earth was transported, shaped, and compacted over years, perhaps decades. The surrounding moats were engineered not only for symbolic separation, but possibly also for ritual and protective purposes. Yet even within this framework, many questions remain unanswered. One of the most striking aspects of Daisen Kofun is that it has never been fully excavated. Unlike many ancient tombs around the world that have been thoroughly studied through archaeological excavation, this site remains largely untouched. It is maintained and protected, but access to its interior is extremely restricted. As a result, what lies within its central burial chamber remains largely speculative. Is the primary burial still intact? What artifacts, if any, remain sealed within the mound? And how much of early Japanese political history might be preserved within its depths? The uncertainty is not due to lack of interest, but rather to cultural and legal considerations. The site is managed with great care, and excavation is approached with caution due to its significance as both a historical monument and a possible imperial tomb. But this lack of direct access inevitably creates space for speculation. Surrounding the mound, archaeologists have discovered numerous haniwa, terracotta clay figures that were placed on and around Kofun burial mounds. These figures take the form of humans, animals, houses, and objects, forming a symbolic landscape that likely served ritual or protective purposes. Their presence suggests that Daisen Kofun was not simply a tomb, but part of a broader ceremonial system involving beliefs about death, authority, and the afterlife. What did these figures represent to the people who placed them there? Were they guardians, offerings, or symbolic representations of a world beyond the living? And how did they relate to the individual buried within the mound? The scale of Daisen Kofun also raises broader questions about early state formation in Japan. The ability to mobilize such massive labor suggests a high degree of political organization. Yet written records from this period are limited, and much of what is known comes from later historical chronicles compiled centuries afterward. This creates a gap between archaeological evidence and written tradition. Was early Yamato society already a centralized political entity, or was it a coalition of powerful regional groups whose authority was still in formation? The tomb may hold clues to this transition, but without excavation, those clues remain hidden. Some researchers have proposed that the size and complexity of Kofun, like Daisen, reflect not only political power, but also ideological systems that emphasized the relationship between rulers and the spiritual landscape. In this interpretation, the mound itself becomes a sacred interface between worlds, connecting the living, the dead, and the divine through monumental architecture. Others suggest more practical explanations rooted in competition among elite groups, where increasingly large tombs served as visible displays of power and legitimacy during a period of political consolidation. And yet, even these interpretations do not fully resolve the central mystery. Why did this tradition of massive burial mounds reach such an extraordinary scale in this particular region and period of history, only to later diminish as political structures evolved? And why does Dazen Kofun, more than any other, stand at the peak of this architectural expression? The surrounding landscape offers little clarity. Today, the mound is enveloped by urban expansion. Modern buildings, roads, and infrastructure encircle the ancient structure, creating a striking contrast between past and present. Yet from above, the keyhole shape remains unmistakable, preserved like a signature from another era. It is a reminder that beneath the surface of modern life, ancient decisions still shape the land. But what remains most compelling is not what we know, but what we do not. The interior of Dazen Kofun has not yielded its secrets in the way many other ancient tombs have. No detailed inventory of its contents exists. No confirmed description of its central chamber has been fully established. The mound stands intact, protecting whatever lies within with remarkable persistence. And so it continues to raise quiet questions. What kind of authority was required to construct something so vast? What beliefs justified investing such immense effort into a single burial structure? And what might the sealed interior still contain that could reshape our understanding of early Japanese history if it were ever fully revealed? As time passes and the world around it changes, Dazen Kofun remains still, an immense form of earth and memory, shaped by human hands but holding on to its inner silence. And in that silence, the mystery endures, not only of who lies within, but of what this monumental act of burial truly meant to the people who built it, and what it continues to mean in the long arc of history that still surrounds it today. If Dazen Kofun reveals how memory itself can be buried beneath monumental landscapes, then our journey now shifts once again across Asia, leaving the quiet green contours of Japan and moving into the dense forests of northern Cambodia. Here, far from the modern city of Siem Reap and the well-traveled routes of Angkor, lies Ko Kher, a once great capital of the Khmer Empire that briefly rose to prominence before slipping back into the embrace of jungle and silence. At first encounter, Ko Kher does not announce itself as a capital at all. The forest dominates everything. Trees rise in tangled layers, roots wrapping around stone foundations, branches stretching across collapsed structures. Only gradually do shapes begin to emerge: pyramidal towers, fragmented temples, and long-abandoned causeways pushing through the vegetation like memories resisting disappearance. And at the center of this landscape stands something unexpected: a stepped pyramid rising sharply above the canopy. Known today as Prasat Tom, this structure dominates Ko Kher's skyline, its 7 tiers climbing toward the sky in a form unlike most other Khmer temples. Unlike the more widely known Angkor Wat, which spreads outward in intricate horizontal symmetry, Ko Kher's central monument ascends vertically, as if attempting to pull the entire sacred landscape upward. This was once the heart of a short-lived but ambitious capital. In the early 10th century A.D., under the rule of King Jayavarman IV, the political center of the Khmer Empire was moved to Ko Kher. For roughly 2 decades, between A.D. 928 and A.D. 944, the city served as the empire's capital during a period of rapid construction, religious transformation, and political assertion. And then, almost as quickly as it rose, it declined. The reasons for this shift remain partially understood. Historical records suggest a return of the capital to the Angkor region after Jayavarman IV's death or political transition, but the deeper dynamics behind Kokhare's brief prominence are still debated. Was it a personal power base established by a ruler asserting independence? A strategic relocation driven by environmental or political pressures? Or part of a broader pattern of shifting sacred geography within the Khmer world? The archaeological record offers clues, but not complete answers. Kokhur is composed of more than 180 sanctuaries spread across a vast area, many still partially hidden beneath forest cover. Temples, shrines, reservoirs, and roads form a dispersed network that suggests a carefully planned urban and ceremonial system. Yet unlike more centralized capitals, Kokhur appears unusually spread out, as if its sacred and administrative functions were distributed across a wide landscape rather than concentrated in a single urban core. Why was this spatial arrangement chosen? Was it practical, symbolic, or both? At Prasat Tam, the stepped pyramid itself raises further questions. Its structure resembles a Mesoamerican pyramid in form, though entirely unrelated in cultural origin. Built from sandstone blocks, it rises approximately 36 meters high, with steep stairways leading to a sanctuary once believed to have housed a linga, a symbolic representation associated with royal and divine authority in Khmer religious tradition. At the summit, the sense of isolation is striking. Surrounded by dense forest, the top platform feels detached from the ground below, as if designed to elevate ritual practice above the human world. From this vantage point, the forest stretches endlessly in every direction, broken only by the faint outlines of other temple structures emerging from the canopy. What rituals took place here? Who ascended these steep steps during Kokhare's brief moment as a capital? And what ceremonies were performed at the top of this towering structure? Mainstream archaeology interprets Kokhur as a political and religious experiment, a capital built by a powerful king seeking to establish authority and reshape the sacred geography of the Khmer Empire. The rapid construction of monumental architecture supports the idea of a concentrated burst of state-driven activity. Yet the brevity of its status as capital remains unusual. Entire cities are rarely built and abandoned as capitals within such a short time span without leaving deeper traces of continuity or conflict. Kokhur's transition back to relative obscurity raises questions about what internal or external forces influenced its fate. Was its abandonment the result of political succession disputes, environmental limitations, or a deliberate recentering of sacred power elsewhere? Or did Kokhur serve a more specialized role than a traditional capital city? Some researchers suggest that Kokhur may have functioned as a highly focused ceremonial center rather than a fully integrated urban capital in the conventional sense. Its layout, density of religious structures, and emphasis on monumental expression could indicate a site designed primarily for ritual authority rather than long-term administrative governance. Others point to its artistic output. The sculptures and carvings recovered from Kokhur are among the most striking of the Khmer period. Figures appear dynamic, expressive, and stylistically distinct from those at other contemporaneous sites. Some art historians argue that Kokhur represents a unique artistic phase within Khmer history, one that reflects experimentation and regional variation during a period of political transition. Yet even here, interpretation is incomplete. Many original sculptures have been removed, relocated, or lost over time. Others remain in situ, partially eroded by centuries of tropical climate and vegetation. What survives is powerful, but fragmented, like visual echoes of a cultural moment that lasted briefly before dissolving into broader historical currents. And then there is the jungle itself. At Kokhur, nature is not a backdrop. It is an active presence. Trees grow through temple walls. Roots displace stone blocks. Moss and lichen reshape surfaces that once bore inscriptions and carvings. Over time, the forest has not simply covered the city, it has absorbed it. This slow transformation raises a quieter question. Is Ko-Ker truly abandoned, or is it simply in a different state of occupation, one in which human intention and natural growth have merged into a single evolving landscape? Some speculative interpretations, rarely supported by mainstream archaeology, suggest that Ko-Ker's unusual layout and rapid rise may reflect deeper cosmological planning, possibly aligned with symbolic geography or ritual mapping of the landscape. Others propose that future discoveries beneath the forest floor may reveal additional structures that could alter current understanding of the site's scale and function. These ideas remain unverified, but they persist because Ko-Ker is still not fully revealed. Large portions of the site remain unexcavated or only partially studied. Satellite imagery continues to suggest additional buried structures beneath dense vegetation. Each new survey adds small pieces to a larger puzzle that is still far from complete. As the sun filters through the canopy and light falls across weathered stone, Ko-Ker feels less like a ruin and more like a threshold, a place where human ambition briefly reshaped the forest, only for the forest to gradually reclaim it. And so the mystery remains. What kind of vision created a capital that rose so quickly and disappeared so quietly? What stories remain locked within its buried temples and half-hidden shrines? And how much of Ko-Ker's true scale and purpose is still waiting beneath the jungle, where stone and root continue their silent conversation across centuries? If Ko-Ker feels like a city swallowed slowly by the jungle, then our path now turns back toward the arid heart of Central Asia, where silence is not grown from roots and vines, but carved by wind and sun into vast open horizons. Here, in the ancient land of Khwarezm, near the lower reaches of the Amu Darya River in present-day Uzbekistan, rise the haunting remains known as Kiz Kala. Weathered, eroded, and partially collapsed, these structures stand as fragmented witnesses to a civilization that once thrived along the edge of desert and oasis. From a distance, Kiz Kala does not resemble a single monument. Instead, it appears as a pair of massive rectangular fortresses made from sun-baked mud brick, their walls softened by centuries of erosion. The structures rise from the flat landscape like geometric shadows, solid yet crumbling at the edges, as if the desert is slowly erasing the memory of their original form. There are two main complexes, Kiz Kala I and Kiz Kala II. Both are associated with the broader architectural tradition of ancient Khwarezm, a civilization that flourished between roughly the first millennium BC and the early centuries AD. This region, positioned between the great rivers and the expanding desert, was once part of a network of fortified settlements, irrigation systems, and trade routes that connected Central Asia to Persia and beyond. And yet, even within this historical framework, Kiz Kala remains somewhat enigmatic. Unlike many ancient sites that clearly reveal their function through inscriptions or extensive excavation, Kiz Kala speaks primarily through architecture and silence. The most striking feature of both structures is their unusual design. Kiz Kala I, the better preserved of the two, consists of a rectangular fortress with thick defensive walls and a series of internal chambers arranged in a highly regular pattern. Some of these rooms appear to have been residential, while others may have served administrative or storage functions. The upper levels suggest the presence of elevated platforms or towers, possibly used for observation or ceremonial purposes. But what immediately draws attention is the combination of defensive and residential elements within the same compact structure. Was this a fortress, a palace, or something that combined both roles? Kiz Kala II, located nearby, appears more heavily eroded, yet its original structure suggests a similarly complex design. Some scholars interpret these buildings as part of a larger defensive system, possibly linked to the protection of agricultural settlements and trade routes in the region. In this interpretation, Kala represents a frontier architecture, built to endure both environmental extremes and human conflict. But the story is not entirely straightforward. One of the recurring mysteries surrounding Khwarezmian architecture, including Kala, is the purpose of certain design choices that seem unusually elaborate for purely defensive structures. Thick walls and compact layouts are expected in fortifications, yet the internal organization of these buildings sometimes suggests additional functions beyond military use. Some researchers have proposed that Kala may have functioned as a fortified residence for elite administrators or local rulers, combining governance, defense, and domestic life within a single architectural system. In this view, the structure becomes not just a military installation, but a statement of authority embedded into the landscape itself. Others suggest a more symbolic dimension. The geometric precision of the layout, the elevated platforms, and the controlled spatial divisions within the fortress may reflect social or ritual hierarchies. In ancient Khwarezm, where water management and land control were essential for survival, power was deeply tied to the ability to organize and sustain life in a harsh environment. Could these architectural forms have been designed not only for practical governance, but also to reflect cosmological or ideological order? The evidence does not provide a definitive answer. Instead, it offers patterns that can be interpreted in multiple ways depending on the lens applied. Archaeological studies of Khwarezm as a whole reveal a highly developed civilization with advanced irrigation systems, fortified settlements, and long-distance trade connections. Yet compared to contemporaneous civilizations in Mesopotamia or the Iranian plateau, written records from Khwarezm are relatively limited, leaving large portions of its political and cultural history open to reconstruction rather than direct reading. This absence of textual clarity naturally extends into sites like Kala. Without inscriptions explicitly describing their function, archaeologists must rely on architectural analysis, material remains, and regional comparisons. And while these methods provide strong frameworks, they cannot fully reconstruct the lived experience of those who inhabited these spaces. What did daily life inside Kala feel like? Was it filled with administrative activity, military vigilance, domestic routine, or ceremonial observance? Or did these categories overlap in ways that modern interpretations struggle to separate? Another layer of uncertainty emerges when considering the broader transformation of the region over time. The Khwarezmian landscape was shaped by shifting river courses, expanding deserts, and changing trade routes. Entire settlements rose and declined in response to environmental and political pressures. In such a dynamic context, Kala may have played different roles at different times, its function evolving as the needs of the surrounding society changed. This raises an important question. Are we looking at a single-purpose structure preserved in partial ruin, or a multi-phase architectural complex that changed meaning across centuries? Some speculative interpretations suggest that structures like Kala may encode more than functional design. A few researchers outside mainstream archaeology have proposed that the precise spatial arrangements of certain Khwarezmian fortresses could reflect symbolic planning systems tied to governance, ritual authority, or even astronomical orientation. These ideas remain unverified and are not widely accepted, yet they persist at the edges of interpretation because the architecture itself leaves room for ambiguity. The more one studies the forms, the more one becomes aware of how much intention might still be hidden beneath what appears to be simple erosion. And then there is the silence of the desert itself. Unlike jungle sites that conceal ruins beneath dense vegetation, Kala is exposed. Wind moves freely across its surfaces. Light shifts across its broken walls throughout the day. There is nothing to hide it, and yet its meaning remains partially obscured. Not by nature, but by time. What remains is structure without voice, form without explanation, presence without narrative. As the sun lowers over the Amu Darya region, Kala casts long, fractured shadows across the desert floor. The outlines of its walls become less distinct, merging gradually with the landscape that has slowly reclaimed it over centuries. It stands not as a complete story, but as a fragment of one, resilient, eroded, and still quietly present. And so the question lingers in the open air of Khwarezm. How many layers of purpose once shaped these walls, and how much of Kala's true identity is still buried beneath the sand, waiting for time, or discovery, to speak again? If Kala speaks in the language of wind-carved silence and desert geometry, then our journey now moves away from the inland deserts of Central Asia and descends toward a very different horizon, the warm, humid edge of the Red Sea, where land and ocean have always negotiated their boundaries. Here, in what is now Eritrea, lie the Adulis ruins, the fragmented remains of an ancient port city that once connected Africa with the wider worlds of Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean. At first glance, the site is understated. Low stone foundations spread across a coastal plain not far from the sea. Scattered ruins emerge from the earth in irregular clusters. Walls of basalt and coral stone, outlines of structures long collapsed, and faint traces of what were once streets or courtyards. The modern coastline sits nearby, but in antiquity, Adulis was directly tied to the sea, its harbor opening onto one of the most important maritime corridors of the ancient world. And yet, despite its strategic position, Adulis does not reveal itself easily. There are no towering monuments here, no grand stone temples rising above the horizon. Instead, there is fragmentation, pieces of a city whose full shape must be reconstructed through archaeology, ancient texts, and careful interpretation of material remains. Historical records suggest that Adulis flourished as early as the first millennium BC and continued to play a significant role through the early centuries AD. It is often associated with the kingdom of Aksum, one of the most powerful and influential civilizations of ancient Northeast Africa. From this port, goods moved across seas and continents: ivory, gold, incense, textiles, and exotic animals, linking inland Africa with the Roman Empire, South Arabia, and beyond. But what makes Adulis particularly compelling is not only its role in trade, but the layered uncertainty surrounding its full historical identity. Much of what is known about the city comes from external sources. Greek and Roman texts describe a bustling port, while later inscriptions from the Aksumite period reference its importance within regional networks. Yet the archaeological record is incomplete, and large portions of the site remain either unexcavated or only partially studied. This leaves open a series of quiet but persistent questions. How large was Adulis at its peak? Was it a single unified urban center, or a collection of interconnected settlements spread across the coastal plain? And how did its relationship with the sea shape its development over time? Excavations have revealed evidence of harbor infrastructure, residential areas, and possible administrative buildings. Imported ceramics and luxury goods indicate long-distance trade connections stretching far beyond the Horn of Africa. Some finds suggest contact with the Mediterranean world, while others point toward the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian Ocean trade networks. Yet the full structure of the city remains elusive. Unlike inland capitals that often leave behind monumental architecture or clearly defined urban layouts, Adulis appears more diffuse, its remains spread across a landscape shaped by shifting shorelines, sedimentation, and centuries of environmental change. It is possible that parts of the ancient city now lie submerged or buried beneath layers of coastal deposition. If so, what remains unseen beneath the modern landscape? And how much of Adulis still lies hidden, waiting beneath sand, soil, or even water? One of the most intriguing aspects of Adulis is its role as a cultural and economic bridge. Goods flowing through the port did not simply pass through, They transformed as they moved. African ivory might become Roman luxury objects. Arabian incense might be redistributed into inland ritual systems. Indian textiles could travel across multiple cultural boundaries, each time taking on new meaning. Adulis was not just a point of exchange. It was a place where worlds overlapped. But overlap does not always mean clarity. Cultural interaction often leaves behind hybrid forms that are difficult to categorize within modern frameworks. In Adulis, this is reflected in the material record: architectural fragments that do not belong to a single stylistic tradition, artifacts that suggest multiple influences, and urban remains that resist simple classification. Was Adulis shaped primarily by Aksumite authority, or did it function as a more autonomous port city influenced by multiple competing powers? And how did its identity shift as regional dynamics changed over centuries? The historical record becomes even more uncertain when considering the city's decline. By the early medieval period, Adulis appears to have diminished in importance, eventually fading from prominence. The reasons for this decline are not fully understood. Changes in trade routes, environmental shifts affecting the coastline, political transformations within the Aksumite realm, or a combination of these factors may all have played a role. But no single explanation fully captures the disappearance of a city that once connected continents. What remains today are traces, foundations partially exposed, pottery fragments embedded in soil, and scattered architectural remnants that hint at a more complex urban past than what survives on the surface. And yet, even in its fragmentary state, Adulis continues to suggest scale. The spacing of ruins implies organized planning. The distribution of artifacts suggests zones of activity. The presence of imported goods indicates sustained interaction with distant regions. Together, these clues form a picture of a city that was both deeply local and profoundly global. Still, so much remains uncertain. Some researchers propose that further excavation could reveal harbor structures or submerged districts that would significantly expand current understanding of the site. Others suggest that Adulis may have been part of a broader coastal network of ports that have yet to be fully mapped or connected within a unified historical narrative. There are even more speculative ideas, less grounded in evidence, but persistent in discussion, that suggest Adulis may preserve traces of maritime knowledge systems that predate or parallel more widely documented trade networks. While these interpretations remain unverified, they reflect the sense that the full story of the Red Sea world is still incomplete. As the sun sets over the coastal plains, the ruins of Adulis take on a quieter presence. Shadows stretch across broken walls. The wind moves through empty foundations that once held warehouses, homes, and administrative spaces. The sea, now slightly distant, continues its steady motion as it has for millennia. And in that quiet, the city seems to exist in two states at once, both present and absent, both known and unknown. What kind of society built a port capable of connecting such distant worlds? What knowledge, organization, and vision allowed Adulis to function as a node in ancient global exchange systems? And how much of its true structure and story still lies beneath the shifting layers of earth and sea, waiting to be brought back into view? If Adulis speaks of movement, of ships, trade winds, and distant horizons, then our journey now turns inland once again, climbing away from the humid coastal plains of the Red Sea and into the highlands of present-day Ethiopia. Here, where the air grows cooler and the landscape becomes shaped by ancient volcanic stone, stands Yeha Temple, a structure that seems almost misplaced in time, as if it arrived from another world and simply remained. At first sight, it is striking not for its size, but for its silence. A rectangular stone building rises from the plateau, its massive blocks carefully fitted together without mortar. The walls are pale, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, yet still remarkably intact. There is a sense of precision in its construction that immediately draws attention, each stone shaped, aligned, and placed with deliberate care, forming a structure that has endured for over 2 millennia. This is the Temple of Yeha. Archaeological consensus places its construction around the 1st millennium BC, associated with the DMT civilization, a polity that flourished in the region before the rise of the Aksumite Empire. Yeha is often considered one of the earliest monumental stone structures in sub-Saharan Africa, and its architectural style shows clear connections to South Arabian traditions across the Red Sea. And yet, despite these established connections, Yeha still carries an air of uncertainty. The temple's design is immediately distinctive. Its walls are constructed from carefully dressed ashlar blocks, some weighing several tons, fitted together with remarkable precision. The scale of the masonry suggests not only advanced engineering knowledge, but also access to organized labor and specialized skill sets. Inside, the structure would have contained a sacred space likely used for ritual activity, possibly dedicated to a deity associated with the South Arabian religious traditions that influenced the region at the time. But what exactly took place within these walls? Mainstream interpretations suggest that Yeha functioned as a major religious center, possibly dedicated to the moon god Almaka, a deity widely venerated in ancient South Arabia. The temple's alignment, architectural style, and associated inscriptions support this connection, indicating strong cultural and religious ties across the Red Sea. Yet even within this framework, questions remain open. Why was such a monumental structure built in this particular highland location? Yeha is not situated in a coastal trade hub like Adulis, nor in a densely populated urban center in the modern sense. Instead, it occupies a highland plateau where visibility and isolation coexist. This placement suggests that the site was not merely practical, but deeply symbolic. Was Yeha chosen for its geographic prominence, its spiritual significance, or both? And how did this sacred space relate to the broader political landscape of the DMT civilization? Archaeological evidence indicates that Yeha was part of a wider complex that included administrative buildings, smaller ritual structures, and possibly residential areas for priests or elites. Nearby ruins suggest that the temple was not an isolated monument, but part of a functioning religious and political center. Still, much of the surrounding settlement remains only partially excavated. What lies beneath the soil beyond the visible temple remains uncertain. Could there be additional structures that would reshape current understanding of the site's scale and importance? Or has erosion and time already removed critical pieces of the puzzle? One of the most compelling aspects of Yeha is its architectural connection to South Arabia. The similarities between Yeha and temples found across the Red Sea are too strong to ignore. This includes not only construction techniques, but also religious symbolism and material culture. Such parallels suggest sustained contact between populations on both sides of the Red Sea, involving exchange of ideas, goods, and possibly even migration. But this connection also raises deeper questions. Was Yeha primarily a local development influenced by external traditions, or was it part of a broader cultural sphere that extended across the Red Sea into Arabia? And if so, how fluid were these ancient boundaries between regions we now separate geographically and politically? Some researchers suggest that Yeha represents a transitional cultural space, neither fully South Arabian nor fully indigenous Ethiopian, but a synthesis of multiple influences converging in a highland environment. In this view, the temple becomes a physical expression of cultural fusion, embodying the complexities of identity in the ancient world. Others propose a more structured interpretation, viewing Yeha as part of a deliberate expansion of South Arabian political and religious influence into the Horn of Africa, possibly tied to trade control and resource access. Yet neither explanation fully resolves the deeper mysteries embedded in the site. The absence of extensive written records from the period limits our ability to reconstruct the lived experiences of those who built and used the temple. While inscriptions exist, they are fragmentary and do not provide a complete narrative of the society that constructed Yeha. This silence leaves space for interpretation. What rituals were performed here? Who were the individuals responsible for maintaining this sacred space? And how did ordinary people perceive the presence of such a monumental structure dominating the highland landscape? Over time, Yeha was eventually abandoned as religious and political centers shifted toward the rising Aksumite civilization. Yet, unlike many ancient sites that were completely forgotten, Yeha remained visible, its stone walls enduring through centuries of change. This continuity of presence raises another question. Did later civilizations view Yeha simply as an abandoned ruin, or did it retain symbolic or ritual significance even after its primary function had ended? Some local traditions suggest that ancient sacred sites often retained cultural importance long after their original purpose faded, becoming places of memory, reverence, or myth. Whether Yeha played such a role remains uncertain, but the possibility adds another layer to its already complex history. Standing within the temple today, the sense of time becomes difficult to measure. The walls do not feel like ruins in the conventional sense. They feel like a structure that is still present, still holding space, still defining an invisible boundary between past and present. Light moves across the stone surfaces in slow patterns, revealing subtle textures carved by both human hands and centuries of weather. And in that quiet atmosphere, the questions persist. What kind of society was capable of constructing such precise and enduring architecture in this early period of history? How far did its connections extend across the Red Sea and beyond? And how much of Yeha's original meaning still lies hidden within its stones, waiting for future discovery or interpretation to bring it into clearer view? For now, the temple remains as it has for centuries, silent, precise, and unresolved, standing at the edge of memory and history, where certainty ends and mystery begins. If Yeha Temple speaks in the language of enduring stone and highland silence, then our journey now moves across an entirely different kind of landscape, away from mountains and inland plateaus, and out into the vast, humid expanse of the western Pacific Ocean. Here, far from continental shores, lies one of the most unusual archaeological landscapes on Earth, Nan Madol. At first approach, it does not look like a city at all. It looks like a pattern emerging from water. From above, Nan Madol reveals itself as a scattered geometric network of small artificial islets spread across a shallow lagoon off the eastern coast of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia. Dark basalt walls trace right-angled channels through turquoise water. Narrow waterways separate rectangular platforms of stone, forming a labyrinth that seems both architectural and aquatic at the same time. It is often called the Venice of the Pacific, but that comparison barely captures its strangeness. Unlike Venice, Nan Madol was not built on naturally stable land. It was constructed directly on coral reef flats and shallow marine waters, requiring immense logistical effort to transport and position massive basalt columns across distances that, even today, remain difficult to fully reconstruct. These are not small stones. Some of the basalt logs used in its construction weigh several tons, shaped into elongated columns and stacked in interlocking formations without mortar. The precision of their placement suggests a level of coordination and planning that continues to challenge assumptions about pre-modern engineering in remote island environments. Mainstream archaeology generally attributes Nan Madol to the Sodalur dynasty, which is believed to have ruled Pohnpei roughly between the 12th and 17th centuries AD. According to oral traditions, the Sodalur established a centralized political and religious system, with Nan Madol serving as its ceremonial and administrative capital. The site is often interpreted as a political center that also functioned as a ritual landscape, where elite residences, temples, mortuary complexes, and administrative structures were distributed across different islets. But even within this framework, the site remains difficult to fully explain. How was such a complex engineered in a lagoon environment without modern machinery? And what logistical systems were required to transport and position thousands of basalt columns across water channels and reef flats? The most commonly accepted explanation involves the use of rafts, canoes, and coordinated labor networks, possibly combined with gradual construction over extended periods. Coral rubble and smaller stones may have been used to build foundations upon which larger basalt columns were carefully arranged. Yet even this explanation leaves open questions about scale and precision. The alignment of certain structures, the regularity of the islets, and the sheer density of construction within a relatively small lagoon area suggest planning that goes beyond purely functional settlement expansion. Nan Madol is not a single structure. It is an entire architectural system. More than 90 artificial islets are spread across the lagoon, many of them serving specific purposes. Some are believed to have housed royalty or elite families, while others appear to have been used for rituals, storage, or mortuary practices. One of the most prominent complexes, Nandawas, is often associated with royal residence and ceremonial authority. It is here that the sense of isolation becomes most pronounced. Massive basalt walls enclose interior courtyards that open directly onto narrow water channels. The separation between spaces is not defined by streets, but by canals. Movement through the city would have required boats, adding a fluid, almost rhythmic quality to daily life. But why build a capital in water? Mainstream interpretations suggest strategic and symbolic reasons. The lagoon provided natural defense, controlling access and limiting movement. At the same time, water may have held deep cosmological significance, representing transition, separation, and sacred boundaries between worlds. In this interpretation, Nan Madol is not only a political center, but also a ritualized landscape, where architecture and environment merge into a unified symbolic system. Yet there are aspects that resist simple categorization. The scale of basalt transport remains one of the most debated elements of the site. The nearest volcanic sources for the stone are located several kilometers away, requiring either overland transport through dense terrain or maritime movement across open water. Neither option would have been simple, especially given the size and weight of the columns. How was this achieved consistently and repeatedly? And what kind of social organization could sustain such large-scale construction in an island environment? Some researchers suggest that Nan Madol reflects a highly centralized authority capable of mobilizing labor across the entire island of Pohnpei. Others propose that the system may have been more distributed, involving cooperation between clans or regional groups under a shared ideological framework. But beyond logistical questions lies a deeper uncertainty. The oral traditions of Pohnpei describe Nan Madol not only as a political center, but as a place of spiritual significance, sometimes associated with powerful ancestral figures or semi-mythical founders. In these accounts, the city is not merely constructed. It is brought into being through acts that blend leadership, ritual authority, and cosmological order. These traditions are rich, but they do not always align neatly with archaeological timelines or structural interpretations. This gap between oral history and material evidence creates space for multiple layers of meaning to coexist. Some interpretations outside mainstream archaeology suggest that Nan Madol may preserve knowledge of maritime engineering systems or navigational traditions that have not been fully reconstructed. Others propose that the site reflects a ceremonial landscape designed to mirror cosmological patterns, with islets and channels representing symbolic divisions of space. While such ideas remain speculative, they persist because Nan Madol itself feels deliberately ordered in a way that is not immediately explained by function alone. Even decay follows structure here. Mangroves grow along stone edges in controlled patterns. Water channels reflect geometric divisions. Ruined walls still define invisible boundaries between spaces that once held specific meaning. And yet, despite centuries of study, excavation, and interpretation, large parts of Nan Madol remain difficult to fully access. Dense vegetation, tidal conditions, and structural fragility limit extensive archaeological work. Beneath the visible ruins, there may still be layers of occupation, construction phases, or earlier modifications that remain undocumented. What lies beneath the surface of the lagoon? And how many phases of human activity have been absorbed into its waterlogged foundations? As the tide moves through the canals, Nan Madol appears to shift subtly between states. At certain angles, it feels like a city. At others, it resembles a ritual diagram drawn across water. And in quieter moments, it feels almost suspended, neither fully abandoned nor fully alive, but existing in a condition between presence and memory. Perhaps the most enduring mystery of Nan Madol is not simply how it was built, but how it was imagined. What kind of worldview produces a capital that exists as both architecture and waterway, both settlement and symbol? And if so much of its structure is still visible yet not fully understood, what parts of its meaning might still be hidden beneath the lagoon, waiting for future generations to read the patterns more clearly than we can today? If Nan Madol feels like a city drawn across water, then our journey now turns once more to the dry highlands of East Africa, where the landscape speaks not in canals or walls, but in vertical silence. Moving inland from the Horn of Africa into the Ethiopian plateau, the terrain rises into open grasslands and rolling hills. Here, scattered across a quiet valley in the region of Garage, lies one of the most enigmatic archaeological landscapes in Africa, the Tia Stellae Field. At first sight, the field does not immediately reveal its significance. It appears as a modest cluster of standing stones, rising from cultivated ground and low vegetation. There is no monumental city surrounding them, no visible architecture framing their presence. Instead, dozens of carved stelae stand upright in loose formation, as if placed with intention that is no longer fully legible. But as one approaches, the stillness changes. The stones are not plain. They are engraved. On their surfaces appear abstract symbols, curved lines, geometric motifs, and repeated patterns that seem neither purely decorative nor entirely functional. Some of the stelae are marked with what appear to be stylized swords, accompanied by additional carvings whose meanings remain uncertain. The stones vary in size, with some reaching several meters in height, their presence quietly dominating the otherwise open field. Archaeological studies date the Tia Stellae complex broadly to between the 10th and 15th centuries AD, placing it within a period of significant cultural and political transformation in the Ethiopian highlands. The site is often associated with burial practices, and excavations in surrounding areas have revealed human remains, suggesting that the stelae functioned as funerary markers or memorial stones. Yet even within this interpretation, many questions remain unresolved. Who were the people commemorated here? And why was this particular landscape chosen as the setting for such a distinctive form of monumentality? The carvings themselves are one of the most compelling mysteries of the site. The repeated sword-like symbols have led many researchers to interpret the stelae as markers of warriors or elite individuals, possibly commemorating those who died in conflict or held military significance. Other symbols, however, are less easily interpreted, resisting straightforward classification within known iconographic systems of the region. What do these symbols represent? Are they literal depictions of weapons and identity, or do they encode more abstract meanings, perhaps tied to lineage, spiritual belief, or social status? The absence of written inscriptions at Tia deepens this uncertainty. Without textual explanation, interpretation relies entirely on visual analysis, regional comparison, and oral tradition. Yet even oral histories provide limited clarity, often shaped by centuries of cultural transformation. This creates a space where meaning is suggested but never fully confirmed. The arrangement of the stelae adds another layer of intrigue. They are not aligned in a strictly uniform grid, nor are they randomly scattered. Instead, they form clusters and patterns that suggest intentional spatial organization. Some appear to mark specific points within the landscape, while others seem grouped in ways that may reflect social or ritual relationships. Was this arrangement symbolic? Could the layout represent kinship structures, territorial divisions, or ritual pathways that are no longer understood? Or does it reflect a funerary system in which the placement of each stone corresponded to specific events, individuals, or moments in time? Mainstream archaeology generally interprets Tia as a burial site associated with a broader tradition of stelae building in southern Ethiopia. Similar sites across the region suggest that standing stones were widely used as markers of memory, identity, and social structure. In this context, Tia represents a localized expression of a broader cultural practice that emphasized commemorating the dead through monumental stone carving. Yet even within this framework, Tia remains unusual. The density of carvings, the specific combination of symbols, and the relatively compact arrangement of the field distinguish it from other stelae sites in the region. This uniqueness has led some researchers to suggest that Tia may have served a more specialized or localized function within the broader tradition. Perhaps it was associated with a particular community, lineage, or historical moment that left a concentrated imprint on the landscape. Or perhaps it represents something more complex, a convergence of multiple traditions layered over time. The surrounding environment offers few additional clues. The Ethiopian highlands are rich in archaeological remains, including churches, burial sites, and ancient settlements. Yet Tia stands somewhat apart from these, both physically and conceptually. It does not form part of a visible urban center, nor is it clearly integrated into a larger architectural complex. Instead, it occupies an open field, exposed to wind, weather, and agricultural use over centuries. This isolation raises an important question. Was Tia once part of a larger, now disappeared settlement or ritual landscape? Could additional structures once have surrounded the stelae, later eroded, buried, or repurposed over time? Or was the open landscape itself an intentional choice, designed to frame the stones against the sky and earth in a way that emphasized their symbolic presence? Some speculative interpretations suggest that the stelae may encode more than memorial function. A few researchers outside mainstream archaeology have proposed that the patterns and symbols could reflect astronomical, calendrical, or cosmological knowledge systems. While these ideas remain unproven, they persist in discussion because certain spatial relationships between stones appear suggestive, though not definitively structured, in relation to landscape orientation. Others propose that the field may reflect a transitional moment in cultural development, where older symbolic systems were being adapted into new social or political frameworks during periods of regional change. Yet none of these interpretations fully resolves the quiet ambiguity of the site. Even today, Tia remains only partially understood. Excavations continue to reveal new details about burial practices and material culture, but the meaning of the stelae as a whole system remains open to interpretation. Each stone adds information, but not necessarily clarity. As the light shifts across the field, shadows stretch from each carved surface, emphasizing both form and absence. The stones do not speak in words, yet they communicate presence, of individuals, of memory, of intention that has survived longer than the societies that created it. And so the field remains, quiet, ordered, and unresolved. A landscape where human lives have been reduced to carved symbols in stone, and where those symbols still resist complete translation. What kind of society created a language of memory so durable, yet so opaque to time? What stories were meant to be preserved in these markings, And how many of those stories have already been lost beneath centuries of silence? And perhaps most importantly, what might still remain unrecognized in the patterns of Tia Stele Field, waiting for future understanding to bring it into view?